Long before my parents decided to uproot our lives from Boston and drop us into the quiet woods of Vermont, I'd always thought silence was something people exaggerated. In a city, silence is never real. It's just a pause between sirens, or a moment when your upstairs neighbors stop stomping. So when my dad told us we were moving to a place so peaceful you won't believe it, all I heard was isolation. I was 17 and already struggling with anxiety that made my chest tighten at night for no real reason. Moving somewhere even lonelier felt like a punishment disguised as a fresh start. My parents bought a house on Birch Hollow Road, a gravel path buried under towering maples that swallowed up sunlight before it even reached the ground. The first time we visited, it wasn't even on Google Maps, just a pin dropped in the middle of green nothing. The owner, a tall, gray-haired man named Mr. Larson, met us at the porch. He had this soft, careful way of speaking, like every sentence was measured first. But what really unnerved me was that he rarely blinked. And when he did look at me, it wasn't direct. His eyes drifted to my reflection in the front window, studying it with an expression I still can't quite describe. Tight, cold, almost hateful, like I'd done something wrong by merely existing. When he caught me noticing, he smiled too quickly, too politely. I told myself I imagined all of it. My parents were already in love with the house. The price was low, the land was huge, and all I saw was a forest big enough to lose someone in. We moved in 2 weeks later. The first chapter of that new life didn't start with a bang. It started with little things that could be explained away. A rake missing from the shed, a hammer that wasn't where Dad swore he left it, a set of muddy footprints outside my bedroom window after a heavy rain. Raccoons, Mom said, waving it off. Deer, Dad said. They wander close sometimes. But deer don't wear boots, and raccoons don't step exactly where my window faces the woods. One night, while brushing my teeth, I saw headlights move slowly down the road, then disappear behind the trees near the old property line on the north side. It wasn't a neighbor. We only had 2 on our entire road, and both lived farther south. I waited for someone to knock or pull into our driveway. They never did. At dinner, I asked, "Did anyone see a car outside earlier?" Dad shrugged. Mom didn't look up from the pot roast. "People get lost around here," she said. "These roads don't show up on most maps." Maybe that was meant to comfort me. It didn't. Weeks passed, and the strangeness stacked up like loose papers I kept ignoring until they nearly blew away in the wind. The night everything escalated was a stormy one in early November. A heavy wind was rattling the shutters, and the trees outside groaned like they were leaning closer to the house. My parents were at a dinner party in town, and I stayed home to study for a history exam. Around 8, the power went out. Normally that wasn't a big deal, but the silence afterward felt thick. Too thick. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to text Mom, but the signal was garbage as usual. Then came the banging. Not random banging. Not wind-blown shutters. This was slow, controlled, like someone hitting metal with deliberate pauses in between. I stood completely still. It came from the side of the house, the direction of the shed. I told myself not to panic. It's probably the storm shifting something. Maybe the loose gutter. Anything. But then I heard something that wiped every excuse off the table. The back door downstairs creaked open. Not a bang. Not a slam. A slow, unmistakable creak, one I heard every morning when Dad left for work. I froze on the second-floor landing, holding my breath like I could hide from the sound of footsteps moving through the kitchen. Slow, unhurried steps. Someone was walking the house like they were familiar with it. Cabinets opened softly. A drawer slid shut. They were exploring, studying. I darted into my room, locked the door quietly, and grabbed the old aluminum softball bat from the corner. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I whispered into my phone to the 911 operator, praying my voice wouldn't give me away. "He's inside," I whispered. "Please, please hurry." The footsteps climbed the stairs. Every step landed with a long pause after it, like he was listening between each one. The hallway floor creaked. He stopped inches from my door. The doorknob turned, hard. He pushed. The lock held. Then the breathing started. Slow, heavy breaths pressed right against the other side of the door like he was smelling the air, searching for fear. I heard him lean in. I swear I felt the wood vibrate, and then suddenly nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. Just silence. I don't know how long I sat there shaking. Bat gripped so tight my knuckles went numb, waiting for the knob to turn again. By the time police arrived, the intruder was gone. But the boot prints he left in the hallway were identical to the ones I'd seen outside my window weeks earlier. No forced entry. No fingerprints. No explanation. My mom arrived home pale and shaking. She hugged me so hard it hurt. "We're changing the locks tomorrow," Dad said, "and installing cameras." I didn't argue. But fear doesn't disappear just because you add deadbolts. For a while, the upgrades helped. Motion lights flickered on every night. Cameras clicked quietly when a squirrel passed. The new locks were solid. We slept a little easier, or my parents did anyway. I didn't. One morning a few months later, Dad called me downstairs. "Becky, can you look at this?" he asked, pointing at the camera feed on his laptop. It was footage from our driveway overnight. Mostly normal. A few raccoons, the neighbor's cat, Mom pulling in late from a shift. Then Dad skipped to 3:12 a.m. A tall, unmoving figure stood at the edge of the tree line. Not walking, not pacing, just standing there, facing the house. For 2 full hours. The frame was grainy, but the posture, stiff, rigid, with squared shoulders, was familiar. I whispered, "It looks like him." My dad didn't respond at first. "Mr. Larson moved 3 states away," he finally said. "A year ago." "Did you tell him we installed cameras?" "Of course not." "Did he know we'd be here alone?" "Becky," he said, "don't go imagining worst-case scenarios." But he didn't deny it. The police came again. They walked the woods, searched the property, questioned the neighbors. But whoever that figure was, they'd already gone. And that was enough to make the whole house feel wrong again. I didn't sleep peacefully for the rest of that year. Not even with the new locks. Not with the lights. Not with the cameras. Every time the house settled, I jolted awake. Every gust of wind sounded like breathing. Every creak of the hallway floor felt like someone retracing their steps. One night, months later, I woke to a soft, familiar sound. 3 slow breaths, right outside my bedroom door. I sat up, heart thundering, but when I pulled the covers back and tiptoed to the door, gripping that same aluminum bat, the hallway was empty. No footprints, no noise, just silence, thick enough to choke on. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the fear had rooted itself too deep. But sometimes, even now, when I think of that house on Birch Hollow Road, I swear I still remember the rhythm of that breathing, the same way you remember a nightmare long after you've woken up. And I know, deep down, that some people don't just leave a place when they move. Sometimes they linger, watching, waiting, just out of sight. Fear has a way of whispering truths we try too hard to ignore. When something feels wrong, trust your instinct. Your safety depends on it. Long before the attic light became a code word for panic, I thought fear had a schedule. It came at night, it came in fits, and it left in the morning when sunlight felt like armor. That was before Spokane and before the night someone pushed through my old apartment door and left my confidence shattered in the hallway like glass. I moved home to Patchwood because rent in my broken-down student life was a luxury I couldn't afford, and because my mom, Evelyn, liked to say family was insurance you couldn't buy. She worked double shifts at the clinic and left before dawn sometimes, so I learned the house by the sound of the furnace and the way the porch steps creaked at different temperatures. I learned the route to the kitchen in the dark. I learned to sleep with a hall light on. On the first week back, I patched loose boards, tightened nails, Fix the attic door that refused to latch. I told myself it was just maintenance. I told myself I was doing something honest with my hands. But the night I found a footprint in the attic dust, I understood the difference between a fix and a lie. That boot print was a stamp on the lie that home was safe. It pointed toward the hatch like a blunt accusation. You weren't paying attention. Evelyn left that evening, sleeves rolled down over her hands even though the clinic had heat. She paused in the doorway, turned back, and asked like she always did, "You shut the attic light?" It was dumb because I hadn't been up there in months, not since I moved in. "Yeah," I lied like it was a reflex. Her face softened, and she kissed my temple. "Promise me you'll lock everything." I promised. I meant to keep it. Promises are funny that way, small and fragile until someone tests them. The house had its own breathing rhythm, the radiator clicking, the dog-eared clock in the kitchen that hung by a degree or two, the wind knocking a rhythm off the porch roof. Around 9:30, the house switched from day quiet to something closer to tuned in. I was in my room, headlamp off, scrolling through jobs on a phone that never called me back, when I heard it. Slow, deliberate scraping overhead. At first I thought of rats, then pipes, and then nothing fit right. The sound was patient, like someone rearranging their body above the ceiling. I grabbed the old metal flashlight from the garage because it felt like a talisman. It always did after Spokane. That night a flashlight was a promise to myself. Don't freeze. The attic hatch sat plain in the hall. Nothing special. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and pulled the hatch open. Cold air spilled down, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and a loneliness that belonged to another person. In the dust, a foot-shaped impression faced toward me. My throat closed. "Jesus," I said aloud, stupid and small. I backed away, slammed the hatch shut, and shoved a chair under it like that would hold a secret at bay. I called my mom. The phone went to voicemail. I called the neighbor, Mrs. Hanley, but she was on the back porch with her television and didn't hear me until I banged on her door half an hour later, barefoot in the snow. "There's someone up there," I blurted. She peered at me with the sharp eyes of someone who'd grown up in a house with more locks than doors and said, "Call the police." I did. The first officer who arrived was young and apologetic. He lifted the hatch, and we both smelled it. That cold cigarette sweet, and a trace of body odor like someone had been camping in a closet. They found bedding, food wrappers, cigarette butts tucked into a corner between the rafters. Photos were the worst. A stack of printed photos, 6 or 7, all grainy and close up. Me asleep on the couch, me hunched over a book, me standing at the window. The dates were spread across weeks. Whoever had been living up there had watched me for more than one night. "Jesus," the cop muttered, paging through the shots. He asked the standard questions. Did I notice anyone suspicious? Any noises? Any cars? I told him about the scraping, the vent rattle, the feeling as if someone had been breathing through the ceiling. He radioed in and a K9 unit came the next day, tracking to the tree line and then losing it like the scent had evaporated. The officers were polite. They filed the report. They said they would follow up. They asked if I wanted to stay somewhere else that night. I said no, because my pride and stubbornness and some far-off idea of normal made me stay. I moved my mattress into my mom's room that night and wedged the old chair under the attic again. I slept with one eye open. Months turned into a constellation of small changes. I stopped leaving the hall light off. I began checking the attic before bed with hands that shook more than they should. I installed a new latch with a padlock. I took the photos to a detective who said he couldn't promise anything. There was no face, no clear prints, and how do you chase a shadow that knows your schedule? He suggested cameras. I bought 3 and mounted them. One in the hall, angled at the hatch, one outside, one in the tree line. You'd think evidence would make the air easier to breathe. Instead, it turned the house into a stage I watched myself inhabit. Once the feed caught a shape crossing the hatch at dawn. A blanket dragged back into darkness. Another morning, the outside camera showed a pair of footprints leading to the back porch and stopping like a question mark. Every time the camera blinked or the feed went black for a fraction longer than the norm, my stomach turned to ice. People tried to be helpful. Evelyn switched shifts sometimes, not often enough. Friends dropped by then, left with faces that said they wanted to help, but didn't know how. I worked nights at the hardware store restocking bolts. It kept me busy and tired. At 3 in the morning, I would sit in the car with the radio on and breathe until my hands stopped trying to pack themselves into fists. The city never found him. The photos, the bedding, the vanished footsteps, all gave us a track that wandered into nothing. I read the police brief twice until the words blurred into a promise they couldn't keep. The worst part, the part that ached, wasn't that someone slept above me. It was that he had watched me in the weeks before. Patient like someone saving the best part of their routine. The house had been a stage, and I had been the feature. That realization bled into everything. I couldn't sleep without thinking about lenses, about angles, about the quiet between breaths. Years later, the attic light still makes my hands go cold. I can stand in a kitchen and feel my neck tighten if I hear a vent rattle. I moved out eventually, chased a job across state lines, took night classes again, started a life that was stitched together out of smaller, safer pieces. But the habit stayed. Hall lights on, cameras checked, locks double-checked. I don't go onto roofs. I avoid dark basements. I keep my curtains closed. Sometimes people say I should be angry. Maybe I am. But anger is blunt, and this thing was subtle and long. The real wound is trust. Who would you be if you knew that someone could be living in the space above your head and you wouldn't know until they pulled down the ladder and stood in the light? The man never came back to the attic that I stayed at least not that we caught. But the idea that he could have been there for weeks, months, making maps of my sleep, that idea cuts deeper than any broken latch. Evelyn still asks sometimes, careful now with her questions. She doesn't say attic light like a test anymore. She says it because she knows what certain phrases can do. Once, over coffee that tasted like burned beans, she reached across the table, took my hand and said, "You did what you could." It was a small absolution. We never catch all our fears. We stack our chairs under hatches, we mount cameras, we call the cops until their voices blur into sirens, and we try to carve safe spaces out of the houses we inherit. For me, the truest thing to say is this: the worst part was not the man himself, but the slow, private way he lived with the knowledge of me. That kind of violation is quieter than a broken window and louder than any alarm. Safety is not only about locks and alarms, but about attention and community. When someone notices and speaks up early, a small scrape under a hatch can stop a long violation before it becomes a life rewritten. I always thought the internet made people braver than they actually were. You give someone a camera and a username, and suddenly they think they're the lead of their own action movie. Maybe I wasn't any different. After losing my part-time video editing job during the pandemic, I spent months sitting in my apartment with too much time, too many ideas, and not enough direction. I binge-watched urban exploration channels, abandoned schools, forgotten factories, underground tunnels, and convinced myself I could do it better. By the time I decided to start my own channel, the world had already moved on from quarantine living, but I hadn't. I was broke, restless, and desperate for something to distract me from the silence of my own life. That's when I found Green Marsh Institute. It sat 3 towns over, tucked in a wooded area off a county highway most people avoided after dark. It had been a psychiatric facility before budget cuts shut it down 8 years earlier. The local forums were full of rumors: squatters, vandals, homeless encampments, and one thread that kept popping up about someone living in the sealed East Ward. Most people laughed it off. I didn't. It felt like the exact kind of place that would launch my extreme midnight exploration series. I convinced 3 friends to go with me: Noah, the loudmouth, Ava, the thrill seeker, and Riley, who just didn't want to be left out. They weren't explorers, not really. They just thought it sounded like an adventure. I promised I'd blur their faces and buy them dinner. That was enough. We planned the trip for a Saturday night. By the time we reached the Green Marsh gates, it was almost 2 in the morning. The moon was pale behind the clouds, barely lighting the cracked drive. The fence was bent where last week's storm had knocked a tree into it. Convenient, Noah laughed, kicking a loose sign across the concrete. It's like the place wants us inside. I forced a smile I didn't feel. Let's just get the footage and get out. Nobody took me seriously. They never did. The inside of Green Marsh smelled like damp clothing and rusting metal. Every step echoed off the walls. Water dripped from somewhere above us, tapping in a steady rhythm that made the corridors feel alive. I held the camera close to my face and whispered into the mic like every explorer online did. Green Marsh Institute, abandoned since 2014. Unauthorized entry. Please don't try this at home. Ava snorted. You sound like a discount documentary narrator. Riley swung a flashlight beam across peeling paint, old patient beds, overturned carts. Cobwebs hung off the ceiling. Looks like every haunted place ever, he said. I felt uneasy already. Abandoned places are supposed to feel still, dead, forgotten. But Green Marsh felt occupied. We moved deeper inside. My shoes left prints in the dust, but sometimes I saw other prints, bigger ones, older ones. We reached the ECT wing around 2:25 a.m. The hall was narrow, and the air smelled faintly of burnt wiring. I filmed everything: the old therapy chairs, broken cabinets, ripped privacy curtains. That's when we heard it. A soft dragging sound, like someone pulling fabric across the floor. Riley whispered, "Tell me that's just the wind." But the dragging wasn't random. It came in pulses. Steps, drag, steps, drag. Noah cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Anyone home?" Silence snapped down like a trap. Even the water drip stopped. "Dude," I hissed, "stop messing around." "I'm not messing," he whispered back. Then from one of the dark rooms ahead, something erupted. A scream, raw, guttural, animalistic, like a man forcing every bit of air out of his lungs in a single burst. A tall figure exploded out of the darkness, bare feet slapping the tile, long coat swinging, hair hanging over his entire face in filthy clumps. Ava screamed. Riley dropped his flashlight. Noah yelled something incoherent. Then we all ran. I remembered the path we took in, but panic turned every hallway into a maze. We knocked over metal stands, kicked open loose doors, tripped over broken floor tiles. The man stayed close behind, shouting words I couldn't understand, sometimes laughing, sometimes growling, sometimes screaming like he wanted the entire building to shake. "Move!" I shouted. "Go! Go! Go!" We burst into the main hall. I could hear his bare feet slapping faster now, closing in. My chest burned. My throat felt shredded. Ava grabbed my sleeve as she sprinted beside me. "Where's the exit?" "Left," I gasped. "The hole in the fence. Just get to the fence." We hit the main stairwell and nearly fell down it. The exit door banged open, and cool night air hit my face so sharply it felt unreal. We sprinted into the parking lot, shoes skidding across gravel. Behind us, the man reached the top of the stairwell. He didn't hesitate. He came down after us, coat whipping behind him, hair hiding everything but the shadow of his face. Riley screamed, "Open the freaking car!" I fumbled the keys. Noah shoved me aside and yanked the door handles like the car might open from pure panic. Ava was crying but still pulling Riley toward the back seat. The man sprinted halfway across the lot before Noah got the engine started. Tires screeched. Gravel flew like shrapnel. The car shot forward. The man vanished into the darkness behind us. Nobody spoke for 10 minutes. Finally, Ava whispered, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I remembered something I'd seen when he got close enough for the camera light to catch his coat. Something stitched onto the fabric near his chest. A security badge. Green Marsh Inpatient Security. When I got home, after the longest, most silent car ride of my life, I showered twice, but the smell of mold and fear stayed stuck to me somehow. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk and went through the footage frame by frame. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced with a cold, sinking dread I couldn't shake. Around the 7-minute mark of the recording, I paused. There, in the shattered window of an old office, the man stood completely still, watching us, not chasing, not hiding, just waiting. He had been there the entire time, standing motionless like he was part of the building itself. I uploaded the video the next day. It went viral in hours. Tens of thousands of views, comments calling it fake, others calling it the most terrifying real-life footage they'd seen. I should have felt triumphant. People were finally watching my channel, finally subscribing, finally validating all the work I'd put in. But every time I reopened the video, I felt sick. Because the more I watched that still frame, the more I realized how aware he'd been of us, how patient, how deliberate, how long he might have lived inside that building after it closed. A week passed. Then 2. The viral heat died down, but the fear didn't. I kept telling myself I imagined it, that the sleepless nights were messing with me, that the shadows outside my window were just shadows. Then, 1 month later, I was filming a simple Q&A video outside my apartment. Cars drove past. Neighbors walked their dogs. It felt normal, safe, until I rewatched the footage. In the background, standing across the street between 2 parked cars, was a tall figure with long, tangled hair and a dark coat, watching me, not moving, just like before. Chasing danger for attention is never worth it. Some places aren't abandoned. They're just waiting for someone curious enough to walk in. And not everyone who watches you wants to be seen. Long before that cabin, I kept a small, secret list of sounds I could live with. A running faucet, the neighbor's radio, muffled through thin walls, the steady hum of fluorescent lights at the clinic where my sister worked. Those were manageable. What I couldn't stand was unpredictability, sudden bangs, a floorboard that creaked in a pattern you couldn't predict, voices you couldn't place. A car accident when I was 12 left me with tinnitus, this constant ringing that lives in my skull like a badly tuned radio. It made silence worse because silence gives the ringing space to shout. So when the school announced the weekend retreat at the old history program cabin on Mirror Lake, I tried to laugh. Mr. Caldwell, the chaperone, made it sound almost charming. Quirks, he said, smiling like he owned the place. Doors that don't always want to stay shut. Pipes that complain. Windows that let the lake in sometimes. A real rustic experience. The others cheered. For them, it was an escape. For me, it was a forced immersion in all the things I already tried hard to avoid. I told myself it was just a night, that being with people would drown the ring in my head. I told myself I could handle it. I had read the maps, memorized the roommate assignments, and practiced small talk I wouldn't have to use. When our van pulled off the dirt road, and the fog swallowed the last of the pines, the cabin looked the way Mr. Caldwell described it, half-rotted, leaning like it was tired, the paint peeling in gentle curls. The lake lay beyond, a flat sheet of pewter. It smelled of mud and old leaves. I felt my chest get tight and tried to smile at the obvious lie that I could pretend this was adventure. That first night, we did the usual things. Campfire stories that all sounded like recycled versions of the same cliché. Hot cocoa with too much powder, and the way kids make less of a thing of fear until it's time to sleep. I shared a bunk with Tyler, a quiet kid from my biology class who snored in a way that made his bedmate laugh on purpose. He laughed hard the night he told me about the raccoon that stole a marshmallow. I nodded and tried to let the sound of his breathing be a blanket. After lights out, the cabin breathed something different. The forest has a rhythm at night that isn't the city's. It clicks and sighs, and every noise seems important because there's so little else. My tinnitus was louder. the ringing punching through the quiet until it felt like a presence of its own. I counted breaths and told myself to stop, but then, at 1:14 a.m., I heard tapping on the outside wall. At first, I thought it was branches, but branches don't tap with a rhythm like knuckles. 3 distinct taps, then a pause, then a slow drag along the siding like a hand testing the wood. The sound moved waist-high, down the side, over to the back. Tyler mumbled something and rolled over. I didn't want to be the kid who wakes everyone for nothing. But the tapping came again, closer, deliberate. I nudged Tyler. "Hey," I whispered. He opened one eye. "What? You hearing that?" "Outside," I said. He scoffed softly. "Probably a raccoon. Go back to sleep." But the tapping changed to a knock, 3 slow knocks right at the back door. The cabin's back door had a rusted handle and, from stories, a warped frame. The knocking wasn't violent. It wasn't trying to break anything. It was polite, patient. It had intention. I crawled to the curtain and peered through a slit of cloth. Fog hung close to the glass. For a heartbeat, I saw nothing. Then the shadow, tall, still. A silhouette against the fog standing near the back door as if listening for something inside. My heart bumped a staccato against my ribs. I pulled back and woke Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell blinked in the early light of his phone and tried to make a joke. "Probably just a branch," he said, voice half sleep and full professionalism. "Old cabins do odd things." But when I described what I saw, the way the tapping moved, the figure at the door, the fog wiped clean like a hand had passed over it, his face changed. He went outside with a flashlight while we crouched in the dark like bad actors in a play we didn't want to be in. He came back pale. "Footprints," he said. "Boots. Heavy. Came around the whole cabin. No sign of forced entry, but someone took their time walking the perimeter. The police were 2 counties away. They could take hours. We did the only sensible thing: we barricaded. We shoved bunk frames against doors, piled chairs by windows, locked anything with a latch. I remember the way the wood scraped as we dragged it, the panic sharpened by the ringing in my ears. The tapping resumed, methodical and unhurried, moving from wall to wall like someone reading a book and paging each chapter. At one point, the back door handle turned. A gloved hand wiped the window beside my bunk and peered in. For a breath, I held my mouth open, waiting to exhale. The face couldn't see me. The glass fogged with someone's breath, and the impression of a palm smudged against the glass like a print you see in movies but never expect in real life. Tyler's hands trembled as he whispered, "Do you see that?" "Yeah," I answered, voice the size of a mouse. "Yeah, I see it." The intruder stayed long enough to test, to listen, to make his presence known, then melted back into the fog like he had never been there. We waited until dawn. The world is always sharper when light returns. The lake's surface flashed like a coin. The police walked the shore and lifted prints from the damp ground. Adult male, heavy boots, walking slow, deliberate steps. There were faint tool marks on the back door and a handprint on the window beside my bunk. The chaperone stopped calling it an animal then. "This was a person," he said, finally, like he had tasted something bitter. After that night, nothing felt normal. The cabin closed its doors to me, but the world outside the cabin changed, too. I started checking locks obsessively. I avoided that section of the woods for weeks, driving around the lake whenever a friend invited me back. My tinnitus worsened for a while. The anxiety wound it hotter inside my skull. I replayed the shadow's stillness so often that I could conjure him by thought alone. People asked if I wanted to press charges, to pursue the prince, but the prince were old boots without a name, and the fog had swallowed him like a trick. We filed a report that unwound into paperwork and polite questions. I had photographs of the smudged palm and the indentation where the window fog had been wiped away. I handed them over like evidence of a ghost. The police did what they could, patrolled the area for a few nights, then moved on to other priorities. Life keeps moving. Months later, I walked past a storefront and saw my reflection in the glass and caught myself expecting to see a smudge on the other side like the one on my bunk window. It was ridiculous and real at the same time. The scariest part wasn't that someone had been at the cabin. The worst was the realization that some people don't break and run. They circle, they observe, they test. They don't always want to steal a thing. Sometimes they just want to see. It's been years now. I still avoid remote cabins when friends plan getaways. People think I'm melodramatic, that it's just a story you survive and then laugh about. But the truth is, The memory of that fog and the 3 knocks and the deliberate walk around the walls lives in me. I sleep with a small lamp on even at home sometimes. I prefer busy hotels to quiet houses, and I keep my phone on the nightstand, even in the middle of the night. I did learn, though. I learned the vocabulary of precaution. Report strange prints. Insist on lights. Don't dismiss a tap on a wall as wind. I learned that silence can be a thing that hides intent as easily as sound. And I learned to listen differently, not just to the ring in my ears, but to the small anomalies, the sounds that don't fit the place. It's not bravery that kept me from opening that curtain the first night. It was the knowledge that the world has more people than you know, and some of them will look at your life and decide to watch. Once, years later, Tyler and I met for coffee. He rubbed the table, smiled, and said, "Remember that cabin? Man, I still get chills." We both laughed, but it wasn't the same laugh as before. We shared the same small disquiet now, like a scar in conversation. He added, "I sleep with the lights on too." I nodded. There was comfort in that. Pay attention to the small, odd things, and don't dismiss your unease. Protection often starts with noticing and speaking up, because not every intruder wants your things. Some just want to watch. I can still smell smoke when I close my eyes, a dry, chemical smell that doesn't belong to any normal house fire. It settled in my bones the night we lost the call crew. The night a kitchen flame licked a drywall seam and everything that wasn't bolted down went black. That was months ago, and I keep replaying it between shifts. The woman who couldn't be revived, the child who kept asking where his mom went, the heat that turned faces into nothing. I walked out of that house a paramedic with my hands shaking and my mind taking inventory of every small failure. After that, sleep became a rumor I read about in other people's houses. I would wake to phantom alarms and the insistence of footsteps that didn't belong to me. Grief, sweating and uninvited, moved in and started rearranging my days. Claire always knew when to show up. She'd been gone for grad school, chasing texts and coffee, but she came back for winter break when she learned I was only holding myself together with coffee and habit. She found me hollowed by the night and handed me casseroles and a practical, steady kindness. "You need a break, Ev," she said the first afternoon she arrived, dropping her luggage by the couch like she owned the place. "Let me be the boring adult for a minute." The rental house we shared sat at the edge of the town like a tired eye looking into an abandoned monastery. People told stories about that place the way small towns always do, tales of wandering shapes, a bell that sometimes rang at midnight, monks who muttered prayers and then disappeared. I told Claire those were the sort of small-town myths she'd laugh at over her late-night reading. She laughed then, but later, when the snow came early and the wind smelled older, she stopped teasing and started checking the locks with me. The first night she left to pick up groceries, I made coffee and pretended the living room TV was company. The power flickered twice, just the house settling into winter, and then something tapped at the back glass like a child testing the world. 3 slow taps, pause, then nothing. I thought of the burned kitchen and the woman who never woke up, and I told myself it was a twig, or the way ice breaks in a new season. My flashlight cut a cone of light into the backyard and found only fresh snow and the low silhouette of the monastery hill. 10 minutes later, the taps came again, and whispering threaded the house like a radio left on low. I blamed the exhaustion, blamed the phantom alarms that had become my nightly soundtrack. I had been on 100 calls where worry turned into motion, where someone could breathe if you just kept doing something. So I did what I always did. I focused on my breath, on counting out lungs, on the steadying ritual that kept panic from toppling me. It didn't work. The real fear didn't begin until I heard them in the attic, soft, patient steps pacing above the living room. They were too deliberate to be mice. I dragged a crowbar from the fireplace closet, my hand suddenly remembering muscle memory I'd used at scenes, and the attic hatch was sealed tight with 2 screws. I stood with the bar raised until the footsteps shifted and then fell quiet, as if someone on the other side had heard me too. Claire texted she'd be home in 20. I thumbed a reply and, like an idiot, told her not to worry. My pride wanted to protect her from the part of me that trembled. The kitchen light snapped on by itself then, washing the room in a brittle, domestic glare. A man stood framed in the doorway, long brown coat, hood pulled down enough to shadow his face. He held a Bible like a talisman. "You have something that belongs to us," he said. His voice was soft, practiced a sermon clipped to a warning. I would have called the police then if my hands weren't already busy finding the lock at Claire's door. I watched him step further into the house and heard another voice answer from the hallway, older and angry, as if I'd walked into some rehearsal for a conviction. They tried doors the way men test windows, patient, murmuring scripture under their breath like they were summoning something familiar. I climbed out through Claire's bedroom window onto the roof because fear made my body choose the route least expected. Up there, snow stiffened under my palms and the town looked small, a scattering of lights and sleeping cars. The two men moved through the house below with the efficiency of people who thought they already owned the place. They swept flashlights along walls, stopping at the mirror in the hallway. One of them said, like a something learned by rote, "He doesn't know what he inherited." It was the first sentence that made the blood drain from my face. Inherited? I had inherited an ambulance shift pattern and a taste for coffee, not some legacy someone else had claims to. I dialed 911 from the cold roof. My voice rationed into sentences that sounded thinner than they were. The dispatcher promised officers were on their way. I could hear so many of the old calls in the hollow between my ribs, the rhythm of instructions, the repetition of how we stabilize things so that people don't fall into the dark alone. By the time the cruisers arrived, the men were gone. No footprints marred the fresh snow outside and no one reported a break-in. Nothing missing, nothing taken, but inside, someone had carved a symbol into my bedroom door, a circle bisected by a vertical line and a small cross etched at the top. When I brushed away the splinters with fingers that refused to stop shaking, a retired monk who'd lived in town for years visited me, eyes like stones softened by time. "That sign," he said without preamble, "was used when someone was believed possessed by grief. It's a mark for purification, not punishment, a warning and an invitation." Grief as something you could carve into oak felt more real than any dream. It was intimate, like a label stitched into your skin without your consent. The men weren't after money. Not exactly. Their Bible and murmured verses were performative religion as ownership. It hurt my pride to realize I had been reduced to a relic. I had been a man walking away from a house we couldn't save, and now strangers had decided what I contained. Claire came home with groceries and a face that tried to be practical and ended up breaking. I told her pieces: the taps, the attic, the roof, the men, and she held me like the sister she always was, not the grad student. We went downstairs and opened the carved door together. The symbol was crude, but deliberate. She read the retired monk's text messages and called him herself. He spoke like someone conveying an old ache. "They believe grief can infect a place," he said, "or the man. They come to clean what they imagine is contaminated." Weeks went by with officers parked around our block longer than usual, and my shifts became exercises in physical endurance and the illusion of control. I slept in fits and starts. At night, I woke to a phantom knocking that made the skin at my wrists rise. I thought I had made progress: therapy, long runs, the clang of the station, coffee pot stubbornly normal, but the carved warning haunted me in a way that was not entirely irrational. One night a month later, I came home to find a single Polaroid on the kitchen table. Claire and me, laughing in the living room the night she'd first arrived. The picture was warm and ordinary, and the edges were cold. There was no note, no intruder's signature, just that image, and the feeling that someone had been there watching long enough to frame us in film. The retired monk called and told me what he believed with a gentleness that made me want to argue and sit down at the same time. "Sometimes communities try to contain grief by turning it into a thing they can mark," he said. "They carve doors, they pray loud, they believe purification is a ritual with an object. But grief resists tidy labels. It moves like a shadow under the floorboards, and it is not ours to be exorcised by strangers." In the end, the men never came back. The police never found a lead past footprints that petered out in the snow. The monastery grounds kept their quiet, and the locals kept telling the same old jokes about wandering monks. Claire left again for school, but we both were different people when she left, smaller in some small dignity, and larger in our cautious habits. I started checking the windows, closing curtains even though she had told me not to turn our lives into locks. I learned to say aloud the names of the people I'd tried to save. Sometimes it felt like resistance, sometimes like making room for them. We carried on, because what else do you do when the night keeps giving you pieces of itself? I returned to work and to the emergency room rhythm that made me feel useful in a way the carved sign never could. The phantom knocks still came, but they came less and less. The attic remained unused and the monastery kept its shadow. People come into your life with tools, words, scriptures, symbols to fix what they cannot understand. Sometimes they help, sometimes they wound. The thing the men called an inheritance wasn't mine because of wood or blood. It was mine because I had seen what fire could do, and I could not pretend that sight did not live inside me. You cannot hand that to a stranger and expect it to disappear. Trauma and grief cannot be marked away by outsiders. Healing is quieter and harder, done by staying, naming what hurts, and choosing who helps you carry it. I moved into Harborview Tower because I needed a fresh line in the margin of my life. Leaving Nate felt like ripping a page out of a book and then pretending the torn edge wasn't there. Harborview was the nearest thing to a clean sheet I could afford. The place wasn't glamorous, flickering hallway lights, thin walls, that faint, everlasting smell of old carpet, but my apartment faced the harbor and the water made my breath slow in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself freedom would feel like this. Small, cheap, and blue in the evenings. I spent my days illustrating children's books at a tiny desk by the window, and my nights sketching silhouettes of boats. The building had a cast of characters. There was Mrs. Leland on 7B, 80-something and sharp as a brass pin, who fed pigeons and warned me about leaving my curtains open. People watch, she told me with that direct, private look older neighbors give you when they mean it. I laughed it off the first few times. Anyone who'd lived long enough becomes a catalog of cautionary tales, but the advice lodged there like a seed. At first it was little things. A scarf unfolded on the couch. My mailbox key moved in the lock. Cereal boxes left slightly ajar, though I hadn't touched them. I blamed moving boxes, jet-lagged brain, the habit of scanning for Nate's habits, even when I knew they were gone. Then, one damp morning, I found my bedroom door closed. I always left it open. That was the first night the dreams started. Heavy breathing behind closet doors, the feeling of a presence that flattened the air around me. I remember the night it turned from petty to terrifying with near-perfect clarity. I was working late on a spread, ink drying on the paper, when the hallway light outside my door began to flicker. It would pulse once, and then a slow, steady rhythm like a cigarette light held too long until it steadied again. I chalked it up to the building's wiring. Then footsteps stopped outside my door. I assumed, dimly, that it was a neighbor returning late. What troubled me was the peephole. I stepped forward to peer through and the glass suddenly went dark, as if someone's palm had been pressed to the other side. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I backed away slowly. The doorknob twitched once, twice, as if testing. The world gets small in those moments, the sound of my own breath too loud, the thrum of neighborhood life suddenly a distant radio. I called the building security desk and let it ring until it hung up on me. I texted Mrs. Leland and she answered immediately. Go to your bedroom. Now. I didn't ask why. I ran, locked the door, shoved a dresser under the knob, and slid under the bed like I'm embarrassed to admit I still did at 31. I could hear the front door creak open. Someone moved through the apartment, with an eerie calm, opening drawers, sliding closet doors, running a hand over the arms of my sofa as if searching for a particular shape. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a text I couldn't read without making a sound. Then a voice, low and patient, came through the crack of my bedroom door. You always leave your curtains open. Time elongated. The voice made ordinary words sound like instruments of intention. I couldn't tell if it was a man's voice or something deeper that had been trained to wait. I heard the slow press of weight against the frame, the muffled intakes of breath right outside the dresser. It felt astonishingly intimate. The intruder seemed less interested in things and more in patterns, how a woman left her curtains, where she kept her favorite mug, what she wore when she answered the phone. A sudden knock from the hallway, Mrs. Leland shouting that she was calling the police, had the intruder bolting. He ran down the stairwell in a sound that felt too small and too quick for the space. I stayed under the bed until the officers came, trembling, ears raw from the adrenaline left ringing. They found pry marks on my doorframe and fingerprints on the window lock. Security footage later showed a hooded man standing outside my door at 3:12 a.m. for over an hour, motionless, facing the peephole, as if watching a portal into my life. When the police left, their faces practiced and polite, Mrs. Leland sat with me in the kitchen, boiling water like it was a ceremony. Some people don't break in to steal, she said, voice flat. They break in to study. She told me she'd seen men on the fire escape before, but never like this, never so still, so patient. After that night I stopped leaving the curtains open. I closed them even in the daytime. In that sense of counter-survival where privacy becomes an action you undertake to protect your small joys, I bought a better deadbolt, begged the front desk to check the stairwell cameras every night, and started carrying my phone like it's a talisman. Friends asked if I wanted them to stay over. I said no more times than I wanted to admit. I couldn't bear the thought of someone learning the rhythm of my life the way that man had, standing outside my door for an hour like he was reading a chapter he intended to memorize. I tried to understand the pattern. Why me? Why this apartment? The answer was simple and awful. I was alone and visible. I painted myself into the world again with the brushes. I had my small illustrations, my late-night coffee runs, and being visible became a liability. The police canvassed, took prints, promised increased patrols. Their reassurances were soft sounds in a room full of hard things. The footage they pulled from the hallway remained maddeningly clear. Him in a hood, never swaying, never pacing, a statue of intent. Mrs. Leland moved out a month later. She said it wasn't the noise or the building. It was that people like him don't displace things. They place themselves in patterns. He didn't come to rob you, she told me the day she packed. He came to learn what you looked at when you slept. Months have passed. I still live in Harborview, but the harbor looks different. The water is a mirror I only glance at. I draw with the curtains closed and hang heavy drapes so even the neighbor's cat can't see the shape of me. When the hallway lights flicker now, my heart still tightens. But the tightening is a different animal, less like a trap snapping and more like a muscle practicing its avoidance. The police never caught him. Sometimes I lie awake thinking about the man in the hood standing at 3:12 a.m., hour after hour, as if time itself had given him permission to observe. Once, while at a gallery opening, a man stood near my work and admired a piece for an uncomfortable length of time. I felt the old itch in my ribs, the memory of being studied. I left early. People tell me to let this be a lesson in resilience, to celebrate that I wasn't physically harmed. I do that on good days. But the truth sits quieter. Intimacy is not consent, and being alone is not an invitation. The scars left by being watched are small and domestic curtains closed, a habit of glancing at door frames, a reluctance to let the light in. It is, perhaps, the price of wanting to see the world again, without someone else writing the margins for you. Privacy is not passive. It's a practice. Keep your boundaries visible and your instincts trusted. If something feels like surveillance, treat it like warning, and act before it becomes evidence. I never wanted the townhouse. When my grandmother died, the lawyer called and then my mother called and then I signed the papers because that's what you do with family things. You inherit the house and the memories and the boxes of stuff you don't have room for. The narrow brick place on Willow Street had a front stoop that leaned a little to the left and a lion's head knocker bolted to the door. Up close the brass looked dull, and when you tapped it, it made a hollow, resonant sound. I told myself it was charming. My chest said something else. When I was 10, somebody broke in while I was upstairs. I didn't see their face, only a dark seam under the bedroom door and the way the floorboard outside creaked in that particular cadence, like a person who knew the house by sound. After that night, I learned small rituals: check the locks, peer through the peephole, slide the deadbolt, leave a light on. They were useless against the memory. They were a promise to myself that didn't keep me safe. Elena loved old things. She loved the way wood warped and paint peeled and the story implied by a dent in a table leg. That's why she stayed. Weekends stuffed with dust and albums of photographs. She'd developed a habit of arriving with coffee and leaving with more boxes labeled in her precise, neat handwriting. We argued, sometimes gently and sometimes not, about what to keep and what to burn. She said the place needed life. I said the place needed a tape recorder to capture nothing happening. We both laughed until the walls hummed. One rainy night, while Elena edited late on the couch, the lion's head rattled. At first I thought it was the storm. The city can do peculiar things to old buildings: wind that slips down a chimney, rain that finds a seam in brickwork. Then the knock came again, slow and methodical, but not the clean brass knock you expect. This was a rattle from inside the ornament itself. I felt my throat tighten and walked to the door barefoot, socks squeaking on the hardwood. The kind of quiet that lives in houses where people are sleeping. The peephole was covered. Maybe someone needs help, Elena whispered when I nudged her awake. I could smell the coffee she'd forgotten to finish. The TV hummed a Sleeping Blue on a paused film. She slipped on a sweatshirt and followed me. We stood 2 feet apart in the hallway and argued about ordinary things: whether to call the police, whether it was likely to be a prank. She always rounded things toward optimism, like a soft hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. The doorknob twisted then, slow as a thought. Not forceful. Not the frantic kind you see in movies. It felt practiced. A patient test of resistance. Then a scrape, like a key dragged along the frame. "Get something," I said before I realized I was telling her to arm herself. She grabbed her phone and a heavy candle holder from the entry table. I hefted the fire poker like it was a promise. We crept upstairs and crouched in the bathroom because it had a good lock and the only window was frosted. The house breathed beneath us, settling into itself. From the stairwell came humming a tuneless, measured sound that ought to have been benign but pressed like a thumb against my spine. Footsteps padded through the rooms below, brushing the old rugs, testing latches, stopping at the kitchen window, then the back door. "I know you're awake," a voice said from the stairwell. It wasn't a shout, not a demand. It sounded like fact. Elena choked out a breath. I dialed 911 with fingers that didn't feel like mine, and got the dispatcher who told me to stay hidden. We listened to the person move through the first floor, the way a resident moves. There was the casual flick of a light switch, the patient peeking into rooms, the low thump against the kitchen cabinets as if someone was checking for noise. 15 minutes is a long time when you are waiting for the sound of footsteps to stop. It's longer when those footsteps are meant to prove you are not alone in your own house. When the police finally burst in, the intruder fled through the rain, leaving muddy prints by the basement door. I had locked that door, I was sure of it. Yet the tracks told a different story. They put up a patrol for a night, left a note taped to the lamppost in the morning. The house smelled like bleach and fear for days. We had the repairman come in to install cameras, Elena insisted, and I watched him crawl on his belly to the threshold, talking about wiring like it was a pleasant, mechanical poetry. A week later he called me from the stoop, voice flat. "You might want to come see this," he said. Inside the lion's head, someone had fitted a tiny camera with a battery pack and a transmitter. It had been watching the porch and the peephole for weeks, studying us. The metal that had always sounded hollow now sounded obscene. "How long?" Elena asked, and her hands were suddenly the hands of someone who knew how to break glass with a phone. "A while," the man said. "Transmission ran to a receiver. Could be anywhere." We moved out 3 days later. We packed in a fog of coffee and stale pizza, everything shoved into boxes without ceremony. Neighbors watched us from across the narrow street, their faces polite and small. When we signed the paperwork to sell the house, the agent smiled and said everything would be renovated, and that buyers loved that brickwork, with a little history. I wanted to tell her that sometimes history has a weight you can't lift, that some houses keep the record of the wrong things clearly. That night in the new apartment I slept with the curtains closed and the TV loud. Elena's photographs looked soft on the walls, ghosts with purpose. She slipped her hand into mine in the dark and whispered, "We did the right thing." It's easy to find the lesson when you're listening for it. For me, the lesson arrived wrapped in ordinary indignation. Someone had been watching the ledger of our comings and goings and deciding where to step. Watching is not always an act of remote cruelty. Sometimes it's preparation. Sometimes it's testing the swing of doors and the hours you forget to lock the back gate. We tried to be practical. I changed my locks, of course, and we added cameras to the new place. I started to sleep with the lamp on. Those were small defenses, and they quieted the dry part of my fear, the one that knows the world is indifferent. They didn't soothe the small, precise memory of a person on the stair, saying my name like punctuation. "What did he want?" Elena asked once as we folded towels. "Why watch us that long?" "Control," I said. The sense that he could be there whenever he liked, that our routines were research. She pushed a stray hair behind her ear and looked down at her hands. "It's perverse," she said softly, "to collect other people's private hours." I wanted to say more, but words felt like lamps in a storm, small, necessary, but not enough. Life moves in soft increments. The months after were filled with normal things, rent checks, friends who brought dinners, weekends photographing light on old brick. Sometimes the night was louder than I liked, and I would walk the apartment, check the locks, peer through peepholes. Old habits are difficult teachers to unlearn. Once, weeks after we'd sold the townhouse, a neighbor sent a message with a short video captured on a doorbell cam. It showed the new tenants laughing on their porch as someone walked by. The brass lion was gone, replaced by a modern knocker. The video ended with a short clip at midnight. The front door closed, a soft rain, and then a quick rattle. The neighbor said the tenants never could explain it. The replacement door had been installed with new screws and a fresh wood core. At some point, the rattling became a story that folded the street into a cautionary note parents passed along. "Don't leave the peephole uncovered. They said at block parties in the summer, as though it were simple as turning off a light. It's not. Safety is a collection of small, repeated things, locks, cameras, the people you trust. But there's also the strange business of what luck attaches to a house. A house can be a map to a person's schedule, and to the small hours they think are their own, and someone who reads maps without asking can promise to return. When I think back now, the thing that scares me most isn't the person who once stood in the stairwell or the camera tucked in an ornament. It's the fact that those nights changed how I move through ordinary places. I close curtains earlier. I check locks longer. I hesitate when a knock sounds like it could be brass. Not because the city is cruel, but because people can be. The routines that make us comfortable can be observed and exploited. Locks and alarms help, but the deeper protection is the care we show one another. Neighbors who notice, friends who stay when we call, openness about fears that might otherwise be rehearsed by someone watching in the dark. If you've ever lived in the old part of a big city, you know that quiet doesn't really exist. It's replaced by a constant hum, the buzz of scooters, vendors shouting, dogs barking at things only they can see. Delhi's old city had that kind of noise, alive even after midnight. I'd lived there most of my life, in a weather-stained two-bedroom flat above a grocery shop, with a balcony that looked out over tangled power lines and cracked rooftops. My mother and I moved there after my father died. She refused to leave, saying the noise made her feel less alone. We had learned to live with the small inconveniences, the unreliable tap water, the power cuts that came without warning. During summer, the electricity could vanish for hours, the air turning heavy and still. You'd sweat, fan yourself with an old newspaper, and wait. It was part of life. That night felt no different at first. It was mid-July, sticky and airless. The city had been teasing us with rain for days, but none came. My mother had gone to bed early, her body worn down by the heat. I stayed up late working on my laptop, a freelance project I'd promised to finish. Around 11:40, the lights flickered once, twice, then died. Everything went black. I sighed, saved what I could, and closed the laptop. I'd been through this enough times to know what came next. A long wait, mosquitoes, and the strange hollow quiet that fills a home when all the machines stop. I lit a candle and sat by the window. Outside, most of the buildings were dark, their outlines faint under the moonlight. I could hear someone coughing on a nearby balcony, a dog whining. But then somewhere below, a gate creaked, metal against metal. I leaned closer to the window, listening. Slow footsteps followed, deliberate ones too steady to belong to someone just passing through. The corridor outside our flat wasn't long, but every sound carried in it. I told myself it was a neighbor, maybe someone checking the breaker box. But the steps stopped right outside our door. Then came a faint rustling, as if someone brushed against the wall. I held my breath. Nothing. I waited a full minute before whispering to myself, probably nothing. That's when I saw the curtain move. A slow, steady sway from the balcony, the kind that happens when someone's standing just behind it. I froze. My first thought was that the wind had picked up, but there was no wind, not even a hint of a breeze. I could see the flame of the candle beside me, standing perfectly still. Then the outline appeared, a man's shape, tall, lean, framed against the dim light coming from the street below. "Mom," I whispered. She stirred in her room, her voice groggy. "Annika, what is it?" "Someone's on the balcony." By the time she reached the doorway, her eyes wide, the man moved, a half step forward, out of the shadow. I could just make out his face, hollow cheeks, dark eyes, unshaven. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his bare feet were covered in dust. My mother's hand clutched the door frame. "Who's that?" He raised both hands slowly. "Please don't scream." His voice was soft, exhausted. "I just need water." I grabbed my phone out of instinct. No signal. The blackout must have taken the cell tower down too. "Stay there," I said, trying to sound calm. "Don't move." "I won't," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." His tone wasn't threatening. It was desperate. I reached for the nearest thing I could find, an old umbrella, and pointed it toward him like a weapon. "How did you get in here?" "The door," he said simply. "It wasn't locked." That didn't make sense. I'd locked it before bed. I knew I had. My mother whispered, "Annika, give him water and let him go." I didn't move at first. My hands were shaking. Then slowly, I picked up a plastic bottle from the counter, twisted the cap off, and slid it toward him across the floor. He took it, keeping his distance, and drank in long, trembling gulps. When he finished, he wiped his mouth and whispered, "Thank you." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" He hesitated. "Doesn't matter. I won't come back." He turned toward the balcony door. Just before stepping out, he looked back at me. "You shouldn't leave your door unlocked." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. The power came back around 4:30 a.m., humming through the ceiling fan in the fridge. I didn't sleep a minute. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, I finally went to check the door. My mother followed close behind, still shaken but silent. The latch was broken, not forced from the outside, but bent from within as if someone had wedged it open quietly, using something thin and precise. I felt sick. "He didn't lie," I whispered. My mother sat down at the table, pressing her palms together. Whoever he was, he could have done worse. That thought haunted me the rest of the day. I called the landlord first. He sounded half asleep and irritated. "Annika, it's an old building. Latches break. I'll send someone in a few days." "A few days?" I repeated. "Someone broke in," he sighed. "Nothing's been stolen, right? It's probably one of those drifters from the railway colony. Keep the balcony locked." That was the kind of answer you got here, in a calm dismissal, like danger was just another inconvenience. I couldn't shake the image of the man's face, the hollowness in his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he spoke. I told myself he was harmless, maybe hungry, maybe lost, but deep down something didn't sit right. Why our flat? Why not any other door in the building? That evening, I checked every lock twice. My mother said prayers before bed. Still, I couldn't relax. Every sound, the groan of the pipes, the thud of a scooter below, had made me flinch. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the man again. Only this time, he wasn't asking for water. He was standing by the bed, whispering something I couldn't hear. 2 nights later, it happened again. The power cut out just after midnight. I'd been sitting by the window reading on my phone, and when the screen went black, my stomach dropped. "Not again," I muttered, lighting a candle. My mother was already asleep. I went to check the door out of habit, pressing on the new latch. It held firm. I almost laughed at myself, jumpy over shadows. Then from the balcony came a faint tap. I froze. "Hello?" a whisper said. I turned slowly. The curtain moved just slightly. This time I grabbed the rolling pin from the counter and stepped forward. "Who's there?" "It's me," the voice said. "Don't be scared." The man stepped into view again, same clothes, same hollow face. But now he looked worse. Pale, sweat-slick, shaking. I kept my distance. "You said you wouldn't come back." "I know." He swallowed hard. "But I had nowhere else to go. Please, just a little food." "I'll leave." I hesitated. I wanted to throw him out, call for help. But I saw his bare feet again, cracked and bleeding. The human part of me overruled the fearful one. I handed him a piece of bread, keeping my eyes on him. He ate quickly, almost shamefully. "Thank you," he said between bites. "Oh, you're kind." "Kind doesn't mean stupid," I snapped. "You broke in twice." He lowered his head. "I didn't mean to scare you. I used to live here. Before they tore down the old block, that stopped me cold." "You what?" "My family had this flat," he said. "Then we lost everything. I came back because I didn't know where else to go." The blackout hummed around us, a strange, suspended silence. For a moment I saw not a stranger, but a ghost of the city itself. Forgotten, displaced, invisible. "Please go," I said quietly. He nodded. "You won't see me again." When the lights flicked back on, the balcony was empty. I didn't tell the police. What would I even say? That a stranger with sad eyes and dirty feet had slipped through our broken lock to ask for water and bread? They'd laugh or worse, not believe me at all. But I did tell the landlord again, demanded a new lock, a stronger door, bars for the balcony. He promised to fix it by the weekend. The next morning I found something on the doorstep, a small brass key, old and worn, tied with a scrap of red thread. No note. I don't know why, but I knew it was from him. That night I finally slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I'd made peace with something. The world outside our door isn't divided neatly into good and bad, safe and dangerous. Sometimes it's just people, desperate, broken, trying to survive the only way they know how. But still, I lock the door every night now, always. And sometimes, When the lights flicker and the hum of the city fades into silence, I think about the man in the blackout and how close fear and compassion can look in the dark. Long before that October storm, I used to think silence was peace. Living out here in the countryside had that old postcard charm. Rolling fields, quiet lanes, and neighbors so far apart you could go weeks without seeing another soul. When my husband Ryan started traveling more for work, I told myself it was fine. I had the kids, the house, my small photography channel online. I could handle the quiet. But quiet has a sound of its own, one you only hear when there's nothing else around. That night began like any other. The kids were finally asleep upstairs, the wind outside whispering against the windows. I brewed coffee, set my phone on the counter, and hit record for a short video. Cozy, stormy night in the country, bows, I said, smiling at the camera. The thunder grumbled right on cue. I thought it would make a great clip. By 9, the rain turned heavy, sharp streaks against the kitchen glass. I made my usual round of the house, locking the doors, checking the windows. Habit, routine, control. When I came back to the kitchen, something didn't look right. The back door was slightly open, just a crack, barely an inch, but I knew I'd shut it. I always shut it. A pulse of unease rippled through me. The storm howled, shaking the trees outside. For a second, I told myself it was the wind, that maybe the latch hadn't caught. But my gut said otherwise. I stepped closer. The cold air from outside brushed my skin. My hand reached for the handle, and then a wave of dizziness hit me. The world tilted. I remember the mug slipping from my hand, the sound of ceramic shattering, and then everything went black. When I woke, I wasn't on the floor. My head felt stuffed with static, my vision swimming in and out of focus. It took me a moment to realize I was sitting upright, in the kitchen chair. My arms ached, pinned behind me. When I tried to move, something tugged at my skin. Tape. Duct tape bound my wrists, my ankles, even my chest against the chair's backrest. My mouth wouldn't move properly. The sticky pull of tape covered it, sealing my voice inside me. Panic came in waves. I shook, twisted, tried to scream, but all that came out were muffled sobs. My breath turned shallow, fogging the air in front of me. Then a click. The small lamp over the kitchen table flickered on, cutting through the darkness. A man stood in the doorway. His face was shadowed beneath a hood, a scarf covering the lower half. His voice when he spoke was low, steady. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "Just tell me where the cash is." My mind spun. I tried to speak, shaking my head, mumbling through the tape.
He didn't yell.
Didn't rush. He just moved around the kitchen like he'd been there before, opening drawers, sliding jewelry into a small canvas bag. The whole thing felt impossible, like watching a nightmare through water. When he turned toward the stairs, something inside me broke. I screamed behind the tape, desperate and raw. He stopped, looked back at me for a long moment, and said quietly, "Don't worry, your kids are still asleep." He left after that, just the sound of rain swallowing him as he disappeared into the storm. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just sat there, the clock ticking too loud, the tape sticking to my skin. Finally, I fought back, pulling, twisting, tearing until I freed my mouth, my wrists. The first thing I did was run upstairs. The kids were safe, both sleeping. I dropped to my knees beside their beds and cried harder than I ever had in my life. The police arrived within the hour. Blue lights flashed against the wet windows, and the house, my safe, perfect little home, became a crime scene. I sat wrapped in a blanket, telling them what I could. A man, average height, hoodie, calm voice. No accent I could place. One of the officers said, "You're lucky. People who break in at night don't usually leave quietly." That word, lucky, echoed for days afterward. They took fingerprints, photos, statements. The house looked smaller now, stripped of its warmth. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow felt like a shape waiting to move. Ryan flew home the next morning, guilt carved into his face. He tried to stay strong for me and the kids, but I saw how shaken he was. We installed new locks, cameras, alarms, everything. But no gadget could fix the way my body still flinched at the sound of thunder. 2 weeks later, the police called. They'd arrested a suspect. He was local, early 30s, no prior record. He'd followed my channel online, piecing together where we lived through the little glimpses I posted. Driveway shots, background views, even the brand of coffee mug I used. He confessed everything, said he never meant to harm anyone, just desperate, broke, angry at the world. But that didn't stop the nightmares. I stopped filming for months. Every time I turned on the camera, I froze. My followers kept asking where I'd gone. Some guessed family trouble. Others said burnout. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. The silence of the house, once peaceful, now pressed in like a second skin. The kids went to school. Ryan worked from home when he could. But at night, when the wind picked up, the memories came crawling back. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., convinced I heard footsteps. Sometimes I'd dream of tape, tight, unbreakable, and wake gasping for air. Therapy helped, slowly. My counselor told me, control is how we survive, but acceptance is how we heal. So I began small, taking walks again, learning to breathe through the panic. Eventually, I posted a video, not about decor or recipes, but about fear. Real fear. I talked about what it does to you, how it lingers, how it changes the way you see the world. The video went viral. Thousands of people messaged me, some with stories worse than mine, some thanking me for saying what they couldn't. That night I cried again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was release. A year passed before I could stand outside during a storm again. When it finally came, lightning splitting the sky, rain hammering the roof, I stood at the window and watched. The house was different now. Not just the locks or the cameras, but something deeper, stronger. Ryan held my hand. The kids laughed upstairs, counting thunder like a game. And for the first time, the sound didn't make my chest tighten. I realized then that the storm never really left me, it just changed shape. It became the reminder that safety isn't guaranteed, that we live in a world where even good people can face bad nights, but also that fear doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. That night I made another video. No filters, no background music. Just me, my voice steady under the sound of rain. Sometimes, I said, the scariest stories are the ones that happen in the quietest places. But surviving them, that's where real strength lives. And as thunder rolled through the hills, I believed it. Evil often hides in plain sight, and fear can find us even in our safest spaces. But strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to keep living, trusting, and rebuilding after it passes. Always guard what you share, value your safety over your image, and remember, storms don't last forever, but the light that follows is always yours to claim. They say New York never sleeps, but from the 34th floor it almost looks peaceful. The taxis are little dots of gold, the sirens just faint color bleeding through glass. I used to love that view, the skyline glittering against the Hudson like it was alive. When I first started babysitting for the Johnsons, I thought I'd made it. I was 20, studying psychology at NYU, and broke enough to take any gig that didn't involve flipping eggs at a diner. The Johnsons were the kind of people who sent Christmas cards in embossed envelopes. Peter Johnson ran a tech firm downtown. His wife Elaine taught art history at Columbia. They had 2 kids, Oliver, 8, and little Maisie, 4, polite, bright, and funny in that Manhattan private school way. Every Friday they went out to some work dinner or gallery event, and I got paid $50 an hour to order sushi and make sure the kids brushed their teeth. I liked their apartment. It smelled like cedar and expensive candles. The doorman always greeted me by name. When I told my mom where I was working, she said, "Honey, you couldn't be safer than 30 floors up in a building like that." She wasn't wrong. Not then. That Friday started like any other. The air had that early winter bite, the kind that turns breath to smoke before the first real snow. I came straight from campus, still wearing my gray NYU hoodie and jeans. Elaine was in a blue dress, rushing to find her earrings while Peter adjusted his tie. "Nina, pizza's in the fridge. Kids are already in pajamas," she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "We'll be back by midnight, maybe earlier," Peter added. "You know the alarm code, right? It beeps when we open the door, so don't panic if you hear it." I smiled, confident. "Got it, Mr. Johnson." By 9, the kids were asleep. I reheated a slice of pizza, scrolled through Netflix, and settled on a rom-com I'd already seen twice. Around 11, I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and let my eyes drift shut to the sound of city wind against the glass. The sound that woke me was soft, one small, polite beep. For a second, I thought it was the microwave or maybe my phone. Then I realized what it was. The door alarm. My stomach tightened. I sat up slowly, blinking against the TV's glow. The digital clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. The Johnsons weren't due home yet. "Mr. Johnson?" I called, voice trembling just a little. No answer. I stood, my bare feet quiet on the marble floor, and glanced toward the hallway. A faint draft swept through the apartment, cold air that didn't belong there. Then a man's voice, low and uneven, echoed from the darkness near the entryway. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. My first thought was Peter's brother or someone else with a key. But there was something in the tone, slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I ducked behind the kitchen island, heart slamming in my chest. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone and whispered, "911. The operator's voice came calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone in the apartment," I whispered. "I'm babysitting. 34th floor, 240 Riverside Tower." The door alarm went off. I heard a man. "Stay on the line, ma'am. Is anyone else in the apartment?" "Yes, the kids, upstairs sleeping." As I said it, my eyes flicked to the baby monitor propped beside the sink. The screen showed 2 quiet rooms bathed in nightlight glow. Then static rolled across it, white noise, lines of interference. For a heartbeat, the image cleared and I saw a face. Not Oliver. Not anyone I recognized. A man's face, pale, close to the camera, staring straight into it. Then the feed went black. I gasped, clapping a hand over my mouth. The dispatcher was saying something I barely heard. My breath came short and fast. "Nina," I told myself. "You need to move now." I crawled toward the hallway, every nerve screaming to run. The man's footsteps echoed faintly from the other end of the apartment. Slow, confident, like he knew exactly where he was going. There was no way out except the front door or the balcony. The elevator needed a key card and the stairwell was beyond the living room. Too exposed. I thought about the kids. I couldn't leave them. The dispatcher's voice came through again. "Ma'am, officers are on their way. Stay hidden. Do not engage." I reached the base of the stairs, heart pounding. A light flicked on upstairs, Maisie's room. Then I heard her small voice, half asleep. "Nina?" The man's footsteps quickened. "Stay in your room, sweetie." I shouted, then cursed myself for making noise. He was on the stairs now. I saw his silhouette. Broad shoulders, dark jacket, moving with awful calm. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a ceramic mug from the counter, and hurled it. It shattered against the wall beside him. He flinched but kept coming. That's when the baby monitor flickered back on for a moment. I saw Oliver's bed empty. Panic knifed through me until a small hand tugged my sleeve. I turned, Oliver wide-eyed, whispering, "I heard something." "What's happening?" "Shh," I mouthed. "Hide behind me." The man reached the bottom step. He was maybe mid-30s, unshaven, eyes cold and wet-looking. He smiled, small, joyless. "Where is she?" he said. I had no idea what he meant. "Who?" He didn't answer. I backed toward the balcony, tugging Oliver with me. The city's cold air seeped through the sliding glass door. If I could get out there, maybe I could climb over to the neighbor's unit, or at least buy time until police arrived. I yanked the handle, the door groaning open, wind roaring in. The man lunged, and then suddenly, from the hall, red and blue lights strobed through the windows. "Police, freeze!" He bolted toward the balcony railing. In one terrifying motion, he swung his leg over and disappeared into the night. They found his footprints on the balcony the next morning, wet boot marks and one partial palm print on the rail. The officers told me he'd climbed up from the 33rd floor, then broke in through the Johnson's sliding door. Elaine arrived home around 1 a.m., pale and shaking when she saw the flashing lights. She pulled Oliver into her arms while I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. When the detective asked for my statement, my voice sounded far away even to me. He said I shouldn't be here. He knew where the baby monitor was. He was calm. The detective nodded, scribbling notes. "We'll check security footage." "Did he take anything?" "No," I said. "Just scared the life out of us." 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Morales. His tone was heavy. "Nina, we think we know who the guy was. Does the name Lucas Brent sound familiar?" It didn't. "He's the ex-boyfriend of their previous nanny. She was fired last month. Some incident with the kids, minor stuff. We think he came back looking for her, didn't realize they'd replaced her." I sat on the edge of my dorm bed, the city humming outside my window. "So, he thought I was her?" "Looks that way." "You were lucky, Nina. He's got a record, assault, stalking. We've got units searching for him now." Lucky. The word rang in my ears. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face in the monitor, the dead calm in his eyes. I'd replay the sound of that chime, the single beep that changed everything. Weeks passed before I could step into another high-rise. The Johnsons offered to pay for therapy and even gave me a recommendation letter. I thanked them but told them I wasn't babysitting anymore. Instead, I started volunteering at a campus hotline, helping students who'd had scares of their own. One girl had woken to find her roommate's ex trying to get in through the fire escape. Another had been followed from the subway for 3 blocks. Each story felt different but carried the same weight, that invisible shiver of what if. In February, Detective Morales called again. "We got him," he said simply. An anonymous tip. "He's in custody." I thanked him, but it didn't feel like victory, more like closing a door that should have never been opened. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that apartment. The scent of cedar candles, the hush of the elevator ride up, the skyline stretching endless below. From that height, you think you're untouchable. But danger doesn't care how high you are. It just finds another way in. I've learned to trust my instincts. I've learned that safety isn't a floor number or a lock code. It's awareness, presence, listening to the tiny alarms in your own chest before the real one ever sounds. Now, when I babysit my niece back home in Jersey, I always check the windows twice. I keep the phone beside me. I still make tea and watch Netflix, but when the kettle whistles, I smile a little, because I'm awake. Safety isn't guaranteed by walls, locks, or height. It's built by awareness, preparation, and trust in your instincts. Listen to the quiet signals, the uneasy feeling, the second thought, the faint alarm before the storm. Because sometimes danger doesn't break the door down. It just walks in when you stop paying attention. I never wanted to build a monument. I wanted a refuge. When I left San Diego for Mexico, it wasn't for the beaches or the tequila, or even the architecture. It was for quiet. I'd spent 20 years designing homes for people who measured their happiness by square footage, who wanted walls to impress their friends instead of protect their hearts. I told myself I was different, that I could build something honest, something transparent. So when Camilla and I found the land outside Guadalajara, a hillside overlooking the valley dotted with agave and brittle grass, I knew it was meant for glass. "No secrets," I'd said, sketching the plans. "Everything visible." Camilla smiled the way she always did when she didn't agree but didn't want to fight. She was a painter, quiet but sharp. Her studio back in San Diego had been filled with canvases that looked like storms, grays and greens colliding, beautiful but never calm. When we moved, she packed only her brushes and one painting, an unfinished portrait of our daughter, Lucia. I told her the glass house would inspire us both. For a while it did. The light was pure. The walls caught the sunrise like an ocean. From the nursery upstairs, you could see the entire valley. We'd wake to birds tapping the windows, to mornings that felt endless. But beauty has a way of becoming unbearable when life inside it isn't right. I started getting more commissions, more travel. Camila stayed home with the baby, painting less and drinking more. I told myself it was just adjustment. She told me I was blind. "You want everything perfect," she'd say. "You don't even see the cracks until they're too big to fix." I laughed it off. I always did. The night everything fell apart began like all the others. Good wine, polite laughter, and a sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was a Thursday in late summer. The valley air was warm and heavy, the kind that makes your clothes stick. I'd invited 2 clients from Mexico City and their wives. Nothing extravagant. Roasted chicken, white wine, candles reflected in the glass walls. Camilla looked beautiful that night. She wore a blue dress I hadn't seen in years. She smiled at all the right moments, laughed too loudly at jokes she didn't like. I remember her filling her wine glass again and again, her hand steady, her eyes distant. When the guests left around midnight, she said, "I'm going to bed. You should lock up." That was our routine. She'd retreat upstairs, I'd stay to clean and turn off the lights. But that night, something in her voice caught me. Not anger, not sadness, resignation. I let it go. The guests' taillights disappeared down the road and the house grew quiet. I poured myself a last drink and stood at the glass wall, watching the valley lights flicker like fallen stars. My reflection looked older than I felt, gray at the temples, a little heavier, eyes tired. Then movement behind me, just a flicker. I turned, nothing. That's when I saw the footprints, muddy, faint, trailing across the white marble from the back door toward the stairs. My first thought was that I'd tracked them in earlier, but they were too small for me, too narrow. "Camilla?" I called. No answer. The baby monitor on the counter crackled, then went dead. I felt a coldness I can't describe. Not fear exactly, something older, deeper, like the air before a storm. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat. The nursery door was open. The crib was empty. The curtains fluttered in the wind. Outside on the terrace steps lay my phone, and a note written in Camilla's handwriting. "You should have locked the house when you lied to me." By the time the police arrived, the sun was coming up. Lucia was found 3 hours later at Camilla's sister's house, safe, sleeping in her arms. Camilla had dropped her off around midnight, they said, kissed her on the forehead and driven away without saying a word. Her car turned up near the bridge on Route 80, driver's door open, headlights on, purse inside. The river below was shallow that time of year. No footprints, no body. I sat in the police station that entire day answering the same questions. When did you last see your wife? Did you argue that night? Why did she leave the baby? I gave them the same answers until the words felt meaningless. I told them about the note. The officer, young, polite, with tired eyes, nodded slowly. "You said it mentioned a lie?" he asked. I said I didn't know what she meant. That was only partly true. There'd been rumors, whispers. A woman I'd hired once, long before Camilla and I left California. It had been nothing. A stupid flirtation that meant less than a shadow. But somehow Camilla had found the messages months later. We'd promised to move on. But I knew she never really had. After the police released me, I drove back to the house. The valley sun glared off the glass walls. From a distance, it still looked perfect. But inside, it felt like a museum of our mistakes. The empty crib, the half-finished bottle of wine, the muddy footprints, everything was evidence of something broken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked from room to room, turning off lights, locking doors. The house creaked in the wind. Around 2 a.m., the baby monitor, dead since that night, crackled again. A whisper, faint and distorted. "Amelia." I froze. Static swallowed the voice. I told myself it was interference. But when I checked the monitor's camera feed, the screen flickered, then showed the nursery, the empty crib, and for a split second, a reflection in the glass door. A woman's silhouette, long hair, standing just outside. Then black. Weeks passed. Camilla's disappearance made local news for a while, then faded. The police said she'd probably fallen into the river, washed downstream. But I knew they hadn't found a body because they hadn't looked hard enough, or because she didn't want to be found. I stayed in the house because I couldn't leave it. It was my penance. Every reflection showed her face. Every night brought new sounds, footsteps, whispers, doors closing softly. I started drinking. I stopped drawing. The client stopped calling. One afternoon, her sister came to pick up Lucia's toys. She looked around the house and shook her head. She hated this place, she said. She told me once it felt like living inside a mirror. You can see everything except yourself. That night I found her phone. It had been hidden behind a drawer in the nursery, wrapped in a scarf. The battery was dead, but when I charged it, I found dozens of voice memos. Most were quiet, just her breathing. But one, recorded 2 nights before she vanished, still plays in my head. I see him sometimes. The man he used to be before the lies, before the house. I don't think he knows how much he's lost. Maybe this is the only way to make him see it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I went to the bridge. The air was cold, the water still. I stood where her car had been found, watching the reflection of the hills ripple below. It struck me then, the house wasn't glass to show the world our honesty. It was glass to convince ourselves we had nothing to hide. But transparency without truth is just exposure. A year later, I sold my practice. The house sat empty for months, unsellable. Too much tragedy attached to its name. I finally bought it back myself and began again. I replaced every glass wall with concrete. I wanted solidity, something that couldn't shatter or reflect. People thought I was crazy, but I needed walls that could hold secrets, not display them. I live there still, alone. Lucia stays with her aunt. Sometimes she visits on weekends. She's 5 now, curious, bright. She doesn't remember her mother, but she asks about her sometimes. "Did Mommy like this house?" She asked once. "She liked the view," I said. When she runs down the hallway, her laughter echoes off the concrete, not glass. It's duller, quieter, but real. Some nights I still dream of Camilla. In the dream, she's painting by the window, humming softly. She looks up, smiles, and says, "You finally built something honest." I wake to silence, the gray light of dawn seeping through the narrow windows I left uncovered. The valley lies below, same as ever. The bridge glints faintly in the distance. Sometimes I drive there, park, and walk down to the river. I stand where they found her car and I wait for a sign. None ever comes, but the waiting itself has become its own kind of peace. The house no longer feels haunted. It feels empty in a way I can live with. Maybe that's the closest thing to forgiveness I'll ever get. Truth isn't about visibility, it's about honesty. You can build walls of glass, expose every inch of your life to the world, but if what's inside is false, the transparency becomes just another disguise. Real strength isn't in showing everything. It's in facing what you've tried to hide. Emilio built a house without secrets, but learned too late that secrets don't vanish when you make them visible. They only echo louder in the silence. In love, in art, in life, the foundation that endures isn't beauty or openness. It's truth. I never thought silence could be heavy, but after David died, it became the loudest thing in my life. The house we built together sat on the edge of the Scottish Highlands, a gray stone cottage with a roof that sighed when the wind pushed against it. He used to joke that the place had a heartbeat of its own, the creaks, the whistles, the subtle shifting of the old wood. When he passed, those sounds turned from comfort to reminder. Every creak was a ghost of him moving from room to room. I'd lived there alone for 2 years. People asked why I didn't move closer to town, but I couldn't bear to leave what we made. The moor stretched for miles around the cottage, a sea of heather and mist that swallowed the world at night. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and most days I preferred it that way. The quiet was company I could control, until I couldn't. That November, storms rolled in from the coast, tearing across the hills like wild animals. The wind never stopped. It clawed at the windows and rattled the roof slates. I spent those nights by the fire, wrapped in one of David's old flannel blankets, reading whatever book I could manage to focus on. That night was no different, until it was. The power flickered just past 10. The light stuttered and died, leaving the house in a shroud of firelight. I sighed, grabbed another log, and told myself the generator would kick in soon. It didn't. Then, under the hum of the storm, I heard it. The soft click of the garden gate. It was a sound I knew well. The squeaky hinge, the dull thud of wood on the latch. No animal could make that. Someone was outside. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a loose latch, but my stomach didn't believe me. The seconds stretched, the fire cracked, and then came the knock, slow, deliberate, human. "Miss," a man's voice called through the door. "I think I'm lost. My car broke down, please." Every hair on my arm stood up. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay even. "I'll call someone for you." "You can't," he said. "There's no service out here." He wasn't wrong. The signal dropped during storms. But the way he said it, like he already knew, made me step back. The latch jiggled once. "Please," he said again. And this time the word didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a command. I grabbed the fireplace poker. My hand trembled. I didn't answer. After a few moments of silence, I heard gravel crunch, footsteps moving away. I waited for relief to come, but it didn't, because minutes later a window upstairs creaked open. The creak from upstairs wasn't loud, but in that dead quiet, it might as well have been a scream. I froze by the fire, listening. "David?" I whispered before I caught myself. Habit. I moved to the foot of the stairs, poker still in hand, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't go up there. But doing nothing was worse. I climbed each step slowly, feeling them complain under my weight. The second-floor hallway was dim, lit only by the moonlight leaking through the curtains. The sound had come from the guest room, the one we hadn't used since before David got sick. When I reached the doorway, I saw it. The window was open just an inch, wind pushing the curtains like breath. Raindrops hit the sill. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I crossed the room and slammed the window shut, twisting the lock tight. Then I checked the others, and all locked. Nothing disturbed. Maybe it was the wind, I thought. Maybe the latch was loose, or maybe he had been telling the truth. I forced myself to look outside. The storm had calmed just enough to see the dark outline of the yard. The gate hung open, swaying back and forth. No figure, no movement. I went back downstairs, keeping the poker close. My phone still had no signal, but I tried anyway. Nothing. "Okay," I said aloud, like saying it would make it real. "He's gone. It's over." I didn't believe myself. I threw another log on the fire and sat by the window, waiting for dawn, trying not to look at the shadows that stretched across the walls. But around midnight, I saw something move outside, a flicker of light like someone's flashlight sweeping across the field. Then another. 2 of them. They were searching. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I watched from the window, keeping the fire low, every sense sharpened by fear. The flashlights moved slowly through the fog. Not random, not lost. Searching with purpose. 2 figures, both tall, both in dark coats. One carried something long, maybe a tool, maybe worse. I thought of calling for help again, but there was still no signal. The landline had been dead for months. The storm last spring had torn the cable, and I hadn't fixed it. I whispered to myself, "You're fine. Just stay quiet." But quiet wasn't protection anymore. Quiet was a trap. After an hour, the lights vanished. I waited, counting the minutes, straining to hear anything beyond the wind. Nothing. At some point, exhaustion caught me. I must have dozed in the chair because the next thing I knew, pale morning light seeped through the curtains. The storm had passed. I checked the yard. Footprints dotted the mud from the gate to the porch, and then around the side of the house. They had been there. I didn't even bother changing out of my flannel pants. I grabbed my coat, keys, and drove straight to town. The sheriff's office in Invermore was small, just a single-story brick building that always smelled faintly of coffee and damp paper. Sheriff Haynes had known David and me for years. When I told him what happened, he frowned but didn't look surprised. "You sure it wasn't just travelers? Storm like that, folks get stranded all the time." "Travelers don't open windows," I said sharply. He sighed, scribbling notes. "We'll send someone out to take a look." "But Eleanor, you live far out. Sometimes wind and fear make a bad mix." "I know what I heard." He nodded but didn't meet my eyes. "We'll check it out." They did, or said they did. That afternoon, Deputy Collins drove out, took photos of the footprints, and left. By evening, he called to say they'd washed away in the rain. No other evidence. I wanted to believe it was over, but that night when I looked out from the kitchen window, the gate was closed again. I hadn't touched it. A week passed. The storm stopped. Life settled back into its old rhythm, or tried to. I told myself it was fine to be alone again, but every night I still checked the windows twice. Then one Thursday I heard it again, the click of the gate. I froze in the kitchen. The clock read 10:14 p.m. I turned off the lights, heart pounding, and peered through the crack in the curtain. A figure stood by the gate, not moving, just standing. "Miss," a voice called. The same voice. "It's me." From before, I gripped the counter. "Go away." I called the police. "I know," he said softly. That wasn't very nice. And then, silence. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they found nothing. Just footprints again, circling the house, fading into the moor. That was the last time I saw him. Or maybe the last time I knew I saw him. Sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I swear I still hear the click of that gate. Fear is a quiet teacher. It shows us not only what lurks outside, but what we carry within. Trust your instincts, and they exist for a reason. And never mistake isolation for safety. The world is not always cruel, but it never rewards those who ignore the sound of the gate when it opens. When Liam and I bought the house on Maple Drive, I thought we'd finally found peace. After years of renting noisy apartments in the city, the quiet hum of suburban life felt like a gift. Our place wasn't big, just a semi-detached house at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with maples that flamed red every October. The kids could finally have a backyard, and I could finally sleep without sirens. We moved in mid-April, the air soft with spring. The couple next door, Tom and Carol, introduced themselves the first day. They were older, maybe late 50s. Tom was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. Carol was smaller, her voice careful, almost apologetic. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, handing me a plate of cookies she must have baked that morning. I thanked her and asked how long they'd lived there. "Oh, a long time. she said quickly, glancing at Tom. Almost 20 years. I didn't think much of it. People have their ways. They seemed private, and that was fine by me. We had our own chaos to manage. 2 young kids, new jobs, and a house that needed more fixing than we'd realized. The first few months passed uneventfully. Liam was working long hours at the hardware store he managed, and I was picking up extra shifts at the clinic. The neighbors kept to themselves. Sometimes I'd hear faint music through the wall, old country songs or the buzz of late-night TV. I liked to imagine them slow dancing in their kitchen, holding on to years of quiet routines. Peace, I thought then, finally had a sound, soft, ordinary, and steady. It started on a Thursday night. I'd traded shifts and came home early. The kids were at my sister's, Liam was closing the store, and the house was still. I made tea, sat on the couch, and for the first time that week let myself exhale. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was the TV, muffled voices through the shared wall. But then a woman's voice rose, sharp and trembling. "Please, Tom, stop." Then a crash. My stomach clenched. I muted the kettle. Another sound followed, something heavy hitting the floor. I stood up, heart hammering. Should I call someone? Go over? I hovered near the wall, listening. The house next door went silent. Then faintly I heard crying. I walked to our front door before I could talk myself out of it. The porch light from next door was off, but a faint glow from inside showed a blurred shape moving behind their frosted glass door. I knocked. "Carol, are you okay?" No answer. But the shadow moved again, fast, jerky, like someone dragging something heavy. I stepped back, my pulse racing. "Carol?" I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Finally, I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. My hand shook as I texted Liam. "Something's wrong next door." He called immediately. "Sophie, don't get involved. You don't know what's going on. She might be hurt. If it's serious, call the police. But don't go over there again." I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Instead, I sat by the window for hours, watching the darkened house next door. At some point, the light in their kitchen flicked off. The silence that followed felt wrong. We were both asleep when the pounding started. It was so loud it rattled the hallway pictures. I jolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs. "Who?" Liam started, grabbing his phone. The pounding came again, frantic, desperate. I pulled on a robe and ran to the door. Through the glass I saw Carol, barefoot, her nightgown torn, eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered when I opened the door. "He's coming." For a second I didn't understand. Then I saw movement behind her. A man's shadow cutting across the yard, illuminated by the streetlight. Tom. He was holding something long and dark. A wrench, maybe. "Get inside!" I shouted, yanking Carol in. Liam slammed the door just as Tom's fist hit the other side with a deafening thud. The whole frame shuddered. The kids were crying upstairs. Liam threw the deadbolt and grabbed his phone. "Call 911. Tom hit the door again, harder this time. The sound echoed down the hallway. Carol slid to the floor, shaking. "He's lost it," she whispered. "He thinks I was leaving him." The pounding stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of Carol's sobs in the wind against the house. Then footsteps outside, retreating. We herded the kids into the pantry at the back of the kitchen and shut the door. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening for sirens, for any sign of him. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the blue lights came. The police found Tom a few houses down, wandering barefoot, still clutching the wrench. He didn't resist. Carol was taken to the hospital. The officers told us it wasn't the first time neighbors had heard shouting, but no one had ever reported it. She'd apparently tried to leave him that night, packed a small bag, called a friend for a ride. He'd caught her by the door. When she ran, she'd gone straight to us. The next morning, the house next door was sealed off with tape. An officer came by for a statement, his voice calm but tired. "Domestic cases," he said quietly, shaking his head. "They're the hardest. You never know what's really happening behind those walls." Liam held my hand while I talked. I could feel his pulse racing through his fingers. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept hearing her voice and that whisper at our door. "He's coming." I started leaving the radio on after that, soft music playing through the night. The silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt alive, waiting. Carol never came back. Her sister moved her out while Tom awaited trial. For months, the house next door sat empty, blinds drawn, grass overgrown. The neighborhood pretended it hadn't happened, but everyone knew. I saw a for sale sign go up that summer. Sometimes when I passed, I'd glance through the window and see the faint outline of where their couch had been. I wondered if she'd been happy there once. Liam apologized one evening over dinner. "You were right," he said quietly. "We should have done something sooner." I shook my head. We didn't know. But that was only partly true. I'd heard the crying, the crash, and told myself it wasn't my business. Now I know better. We still live on Maple Drive. The new family next door is young, with a golden retriever that barks at everything. I don't mind the noise. Silence, I've learned, isn't always safe. At night, when the kids are asleep and the house settles into its old bones, I still keep the radio on. Soft, steady, reminding me that peace isn't about quiet. It's about knowing the people around you are okay. Don't look away. When something feels wrong, when you hear fear in someone's voice, act. We tell ourselves not to meddle, not to assume, but silence can be its own kind of danger. True community isn't built on minding your own business. It's built on watching out for each other, because sometimes the wall between your home and someone else's life is thinner than you think. I used to think suburbs were safe. That was the whole point of moving there, safety. After our second child, Claire and I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere predictable. We'd lived in downtown Sacramento for years, but the late-night noise and constant sirens made her nervous. So we traded our cramped apartment for a beige two-story house on a cul-de-sac lined with mailboxes and maple trees. It looked like the kind of place where people still borrowed cups of sugar and waved when they saw you pulling in from work. We met the neighbors within the first week. The Millers on one side, retirees with more lawn ornaments than I could count, and the Lamberts on the other, a young couple with twin boys. Everyone was polite, chatty in that surface-level way, and for the first time in years I felt like we'd done something right. Claire seemed happier too. She took morning walks with the baby stroller, our 4-year-old Lily, riding her scooter ahead of her. I'd catch them from the window sometimes. Claire's hair tied up, the stroller rolling smooth, sunlight spilling across the sidewalk. It was the picture of normal. We'd been there about 3 months when I decided to host a small dinner. A couple of friends from work, Claire's sister and her husband. We cooked, laughed, drank wine, nothing wild. Around midnight, after everyone left, I went outside to take out the trash. That's when I noticed the flower pot by the front steps looked off-center. It took me a second to realize what was missing: the spare key. I'd kept it under there since we moved in. A dumb habit, but one I never questioned. "Claire?" I called inside. "Did you move the key?" She looked up from the sink, frowning. "No, why?" "It's gone," she shrugged. "Probably fell somewhere in the dirt." I wanted to believe that. I knelt down, digging through the soil, but there was nothing. Still, I brushed it off. Probably dropped when I watered the plants. By the time we locked up and went to bed, it was past 1 in the morning. The house was quiet except for the hum of the AC. I fell asleep fast, but at 3 a.m. Claire shook me awake. Her voice was sharp, trembling. "Jake, the monitor." I sat up, disoriented. "What?" "Someone's in the nursery." I'll never forget the sound of the baby monitor that night. The faint static, the low hiss of air, and under it, something else. A whisper. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and sprinted down the hall. The nursery door was half open, swaying slightly. The nightlight glowed faintly on the wall. Inside, someone was standing by the crib. A man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. His hand hovered over the crib and I heard him whisper something. I couldn't make out the words, but they froze me in place. "Hey," I shouted. He turned his head, startled. His eyes caught the dim light, wide, panicked. Then he bolted. He didn't go for the door. He went for the window. Glass rattled as he disappeared into the night. I rushed to the crib. My son was crying, unharmed. Claire appeared behind me, clutching Lily to her chest. "Jake, oh my God, who was that?" "I don't know," I said, breathless. "Call 911. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Lights flashing against our windows, the whole street awake now. The neighbors came out in robes, whispering. I gave the officers everything I could. What he looked like, the direction he ran, how long he'd been there. When they finished searching the yard, the detective, a man named Ruiz, came inside. He held up something small and black. "Found this inside your baby monitor," he said. It was a tiny camera lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser. Claire's face went pale. That's not ours. Ruiz nodded grimly. Someone modified it. This wasn't a break-in for valuables. My stomach dropped. You mean he's been watching us? Could be. He paused. Have you had any work done in the house recently? Claire and I looked at each other. Yeah, she said quietly. Last month. A security installer. Cameras, alarms, that kind of thing. Ruiz's eyes narrowed. You still have his information? I nodded slowly, dread pooling in my chest. Yeah, it's in the drawer. The installer's name was Kevin Moore, mid-30s, short, neatly dressed, with that friendly salesman smile. He'd come recommended through an online ad. I remembered how polite he'd been, taking off his shoes before walking in, explaining everything clearly. Motion sensors, cameras, app setup. He spent nearly 5 hours in our house that day, setting up cameras in the entryway, back porch, and nursery. Claire had been home the whole time. He was nice, she told the detective. Maybe too nice. Talked a lot about how families should feel safe. Detective Ruiz jotted that down. Did he work alone? No, he said his assistant called out sick. When they left, Ruiz promised they'd look into it. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the window with a baseball bat across my lap. The next morning, I checked our security system myself. The cameras worked, but when I logged into the app, I noticed something odd. There was another user account listed, one I hadn't created. Guest 01. I deleted it instantly and changed every password I could think of. Wi-Fi, router, system login. Then I tore apart the flower pot and threw it in the trash. Days turned into weeks. The police never found him. Ruiz said Moore's business had dissolved, his office empty, phone disconnected. Probably operating under a fake name, he said. Claire couldn't sleep after that. Neither could I. We started keeping the bedroom door locked at night. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the fridge, that made us jump. Neighbors started avoiding us. I could see it in their eyes and the quiet judgment. Bad things didn't happen here. Not in their perfect suburb. Then one night around 2 a.m., I woke to the faint sound of static again. The baby monitor. I sat up, pulse quickening. The screen was darkened, but the sound was there. Not crying, breathing. I unplugged it, threw it against the wall. Claire woke with a start. What is it? Someone was on the feed. We packed the kids into the car and drove straight to her sister's house across town. I didn't go back until morning. When I did, I found a note under the doormat. 2 words, nice family. We sold the house within 3 months. Claire didn't want to, but she couldn't walk past that nursery without crying. I couldn't either. We moved to an apartment complex downtown, smaller, noisier, but somehow safer. There's comfort in noise now. I changed careers after that. Started working for a home security company, the legitimate kind. It felt ironic at first, but also right. Sometimes when people call nervous about small things, a missing key, a flickering camera light, I tell them, change the locks anyway. I never mention what happened to us. Not the missing key, not the whisper in the nursery, not the camera hidden in the monitor. Some things are better left unspoken, but every time I see a flower pot by a front door, I think about how easy it is to confuse safety with habit, because safety isn't the locks you buy. It's the ones you build in your mind, the ones that make you pay attention before something happens, not after. If you'd asked me before that winter, I would have said our family was as ordinary as any on Maple Drive. Dad worked maintenance at the community college. Mom taught 2nd grade. My little sister, Lily, was 8, and I was 16, half bored, half restless, convinced that nothing exciting ever happened in our quiet Ohio suburb. That changed when Dad brought home the lights. He'd seen some viral video online, a house synchronized to Christmas music, and got it in his head that we could do it too. He called it a family project, but really it was his way of proving that we could keep up with the big houses across town. The Harrises didn't take vacations to Disney or drive new cars, but by God, we could have the brightest house on the block. It started in early November. Every weekend we climbed ladders, strung wires, tested circuits. Dad even bought a cheap controller that connected the lights to songs on the radio. When it worked, when the whole house blinked and danced perfectly to Jingle Bell Rock, we stood out front in the cold, grinning like idiots. Cars slowed to watch. Neighbors waved. I felt proud, like we'd built something together that couldn't be ignored. Mom loved it too at first. She'd hand out cocoa to the families who stopped to take pictures. "It's bringing people joy," she said. "Nothing wrong with a little extra light." Inside, we were happy in the simple ways families are. Happy dinner at 6, Dad humming along to the oldies station, Lily writing letters to Santa. I didn't realize how fragile that kind of peace could be, or how easily it could attract the wrong kind of attention. The week before Christmas, we made the local news. A reporter came by, filmed the house, interviewed Dad on the lawn. He was glowing, my old man who never bragged about anything, standing there in his work boots saying, "We just wanted to spread some cheer." The video went online. Thousands of views, comments like "looks amazing" and "wish my neighbors did this." But there were other comments too, people asking for our address, wondering what kind of equipment we used, joking about how the electric bill must be crazy. One said, "Bet they've got some nice stuff inside that house." I didn't tell my parents that part. Back then, I thought the internet was just noise. That year, Christmas felt bigger than ever. Relatives visited, presents piled under the tree, and the house buzzed with warmth and light. Dad and I kept the show running every night until 10. When snow fell on Christmas Eve, the lights made it look like we were living inside a snow globe. Mom called it a perfect year. She didn't know that, in between songs, I'd noticed a dark SUV parked across the street a few times. The windows were tinted, engine idling. I figured it was just people watching the show. Lots of cars stopped to see it. Why worry about one more? Inside, the gifts glittered beneath the tree. Some of them were small, socks, books, but others weren't. Mom had saved up for a new laptop for Dad. He'd bought her jewelry he couldn't really afford. I'd gotten Lily a bike, the first brand new one she'd ever had. We'd done well that year, and we wanted to show it. Maybe too much. After the big Christmas dinner, I remember standing outside with Dad, our breath turning white in the cold. "Looks good, huh?" he said, looking up at the lights. "Yeah," I told him, "it's awesome." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You helped make this happen. That means something." I wanted to believe him, but when I looked down the street, the other houses were dark, ordinary. For the first time, our brightness made me uneasy, like we were shouting in a place meant for whispers. 2 nights after Christmas, we were finishing dinner when the power flickered, then went completely out. The sudden dark felt strange. No hum from the fridge, no glow from the windows. Lily squealed. Mom said, "Must be the storm," though there wasn't one. Dad grabbed a flashlight and went to the garage to check the breaker. I followed a few steps behind. The air felt colder near the door. I heard him curse softly. Damn things tripped again. Then a crash, a door slamming open. Before I could move, 3 men burst in from the side door, faces hidden under ski masks. One shoved Dad against the wall. Another waved a gun. Mom screamed from the kitchen, "Everybody down, now!" My knees hit the tile. Lily was crying. I could smell the mud on their boots, the sweat and metal of the gun. "Where's the safe?" one demanded. We don't have a safe," Dad stammered. "Don't lie to me," the man snapped. "The house, the lights, all this crap. You got money somewhere." They tore through the living room, yanking drawers open, dumping boxes. I could hear ornaments breaking. One grabbed Mom's wrist, yanking off her bracelet. I stood halfway, not thinking, just wanting him to let her go. The gun turned toward me. "Sit down, kid. You move again, I'll make you sit." I froze. It felt like hours, but it was maybe 10 minutes before they ran out, arms full of whatever they'd taken. The door slammed, then silence. Dad crawled to the phone, his hands shaking as he called 911. When the police arrived, their lights painted the house red and blue. The neighbors came out in robes, whispering. I sat with Lily wrapped in a blanket, listening to the officers ask questions, watching the lights flicker on our windows one last time before the power company restored them. They'd taken our electronics, Mom's jewelry, Dad's wallet, but what they really took was something harder to name. The next morning, daylight showed the mess. broken glass, torn wrapping paper, muddy footprints. The Christmas tree looked like it had been knocked sideways in a storm. Mom tried to clean, but her hands kept shaking. Dad just stood by the window staring at the yard full of deflated decorations. He unplugged the controller and tossed it in the trash. The police came back that afternoon. They said the robbers were likely part of a crew hitting high-profile houses, people who looked like they had valuables. The lights, the news story, the open curtains, all of it had made us stand out. "It wasn't your fault," the officer told Dad. "They pick easy targets." But I could see it in Dad's face. He blamed himself. That night, we slept in the same room, all of us together. I remember Lily whispering, "They're not coming back, right?" "No, honey," Mom said softly. "They're gone." I wanted to believe her, but every sound made me flinch. The creak of the furnace, the groan of the wind. In the days that followed, neighbors dropped off food, offered help. Some even donated money to replace what was stolen. But when someone suggested helping Dad rebuild the display next year, he shook his head. "No more lights," he said quietly. "We've had enough attention." I saw something change in him after that. He still smiled at work, but his laughter never quite reached his eyes. He double-locked every door, checked windows twice before bed. Mom took down the last of the decorations on New Year's Eve. The house looked bare, almost unfamiliar. I missed the glow, but I understood why it had to go. Time moved on. The police never caught the men. Insurance covered some of what we lost, but not all. By the next Christmas, things felt smaller. We still decorated, but just a few lights around the porch, nothing more. Inside, though, we were closer. We cooked together, played games, told stories instead of watching TV. One night, while wrapping presents, Dad said, "You know, Evan, I used to think showing people our best side meant being seen, but maybe it just means being together." I nodded. "Yeah, being seen doesn't always mean being safe." He smiled, tired but warm. "You're growing up, kid." We never went back to the big displays. Still, each year when I plug in that single string of porch lights, I think about that night, the crash of the door, Lily's cry, the way fear can burn brighter than any bulb. But I also think about what followed, the quiet mornings, the calm dinners, the soft laughter that replaced the blinding glow. Now, years later, whenever I drive past the houses that sparkle like Vegas on a cul-de-sac, I feel both admiration and worry. Beauty draws eyes. Sometimes the wrong ones. We still celebrate. We still believe in light. But we've learned how to keep it gentle, how to let it warm rather than blind. Maybe that's what growing up really is, learning the difference between shining and showing off. Brightness without awareness invites shadow. The Harris family learned that joy isn't measured by how loudly it glows, but by how safely it endures. In life, as in that winter, we must remember, being seen isn't the same as being secure, and the truest light is the one that shines quietly within, not the one that blinds the world outside. I used to think the ocean could wash anything clean. Maybe that's why I chose to live near it. For the sound, the distance, and the illusion that salt water could scrub away the things I didn't want to remember. My name's Leah Carter. I live on the coast just outside Cannon Beach, Oregon. The house isn't much, just a weather-worn bungalow tucked against the dunes, but it's home. My husband, Rick, works nights with the Coast Guard, and I work as a wildlife rescuer for a small nonprofit. My days are full of injured seals, tangled pelicans, and the occasional fox that strays too close to the highway. The only one who keeps me company most nights is Max, my German Shepherd, 100 pounds of loyalty and fur. He came from a rescue shelter, nervous around strangers but fierce when it mattered. When Rick's gone, Max is my shadow, padding beside me through every creak and whisper of the old house. That March evening had been calm. The air was heavy with brine, the kind that sticks to your skin, and the moon was a sliver over the water. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through intake forms for a stranded seal pup when Max started barking. Not the casual "there's a raccoon outside" bark. It was sharp, guttural, the sound he made when something wasn't right. "Max, enough!" I called from the doorway. He didn't stop. His body was pressed against the back fence, tail stiff, teeth bared at the dark stretch of trees beyond the yard. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on Rick's old flannel, and stepped out into the wind. The beam cut through mist and dune grass. "Max!" I shouted again. Silence. Then the sound of paws thudding against the earth receding. I ran to the gate, but it was wide open, the latch hanging loose. On the ground, glinting in my flashlight, was Max's leather collar, torn clean through. Panic hits differently when it's quiet. The only sound was the waves, low and endless, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I called for Max until my throat burned, then bolted back inside and grabbed the phone. Rick answered on the first ring, his voice crackling over static. "Leah, everything okay?" "Someone's taken Max," I said, barely getting the words out. "The gate's open. His collar's on the ground." Rick's tone changed instantly. "Lock the doors. Stay inside. I'm calling the sheriff right now." I double-checked every window, every latch, even the sliding glass door that never quite shut right. The house felt suddenly small. Every creak in the wood sounded like footsteps. I kept the porch light on, phone in hand, waiting for headlights that didn't come. Then maybe 15 minutes later, I heard a sound from the laundry room. A dull, heavy thud. "Max," my voice cracked. I took a few steps down the hall. Then I heard it, a bark. Short, muffled, but his. Relief hit me like a wave. I swung the door open and froze. A man was crouched beside the washing machine, one hand clamped over Max's muzzle. His other hand held a screwdriver. Not quite a weapon, but close enough. "Quiet," he hissed. His eyes darted between me and the window. "I don't want trouble. I just need your car keys." My hands trembled as I pointed to the counter. "There, please, just take them." He moved fast, snatching the keys, then looked at me once more. "You're lucky your dog listens." Then he was gone. The door banging open, footsteps fading into the night. The sheriff's cruiser showed up 20 minutes later, lights spinning blue across the dunes. Max was pressed against my leg the whole time, trembling but unhurt. Deputy Harris, a broad man with kind eyes, listened as I recounted every detail. "You said he didn't hurt you?" he asked. "No, just scared me half to death." He nodded, scribbling notes. "We've got reports of an escapee from the state penitentiary up in Tillamook. Could be your guy. We'll put out an alert on your vehicle." Rick got home at dawn. He wrapped me in his arms and didn't say a word for a long time. When he finally pulled back, his face was pale. "You could have been killed, Leah." I knew that. The thought kept replaying. How close he'd been, how easily it could have gone wrong. 2 days later, the police called. They'd found my truck 20 miles north, crashed against a guardrail. The driver was dead. Escaped convict named Daniel Boyd. Armed robbery, 2 prior assaults. For a long time, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt like footsteps returning. Max barely left my side, sleeping at the foot of the bed, growling at shadows. Rick took extra shifts so he could be home during the day, and I threw myself into work. Rescuing, healing, fixing. It was the only way I knew to quiet the noise inside my head. By summer, the nightmares had eased, but the fear lingered in small ways. Locking the car twice, checking the back door even when I knew it was shut. One afternoon, I was driving back from a rescue call, a pelican tangled in fishing line, when I realized I'd started taking the long route home without thinking. The crash site was on the main highway and I couldn't bring myself to pass it. At the center, people asked how I was doing. I always said fine. But fine was just a word. Rick tried to help, but he carried his own guilt. For not being there, for telling me to stay inside instead of coming straight home. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said quietly, "You know, it's not your fault. I keep thinking if I hadn't gone outside." He shook his head. "Leah, you didn't do anything wrong. You did what anyone would have done." Max lay between us, head resting on my foot, eyes half closed. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. He'd been different since that night. Calmer in some ways, more protective in others. The vet said trauma can change animals too. I believed it. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. I realized then that fear doesn't vanish. It just becomes something you learn to live beside, like the tide. Always there, rising and falling, but never gone. A year passed before I stopped flinching at sudden noises. By then, life had returned to its rhythm. Rescues, quiet evenings, the sound of the surf outside our window. We'd replaced the gate, installed motion lights, and finally adopted a second rescue dog. A timid husky mix named Luna. Max treated her like family from day one. Sometimes people ask why I didn't move after what happened. I tell them the truth, and because this is my home, fear doesn't get to take that from me. One autumn morning, I was walking both dogs along the cliffs when I met an older woman collecting driftwood. She smiled and said, "Beautiful dogs. You must feel safe with them." I hesitated, then nodded. "Safer than I used to." She laughed softly. "It's funny. Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us." Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. That night, as I sat by the fire with Max's head in my lap, I finally understood what she meant. The world isn't predictable. It can turn on you without warning. One moment calm, the next chaos. But the things we love, the living bonds we build, those are what pull us back from the edge. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's learning to move forward despite it. Leah discovered that strength isn't found in walls, locks, or distance, but in connection. To others, to the creatures we protect, and to the part of ourselves that refuses to surrender to fear. When I first moved to Boston, I wasn't looking for luxury. I just needed a place that didn't smell like mildew and was close enough to the subway that I could make it to my internship. Downtown without 2 transfers. The flat I found on Carver Street fit the bill. A narrow 1-bedroom tucked inside a 19th century brick building with tall windows and crooked floors. The kind of place that looked charming in the daylight and faintly haunted after dark. I was 27, fresh out of grad school, working part-time at a publishing house while trying to finish a collection of essays I hoped would get me somewhere. The rent was cheap because, as the landlord said with a laugh, old buildings have their moods. My upstairs neighbor, Mr. Leonard, everyone called him Lenoir because of his last name, was a retired music teacher. 70-something, soft-spoken, polite. He wore cardigans and smelled like pipe tobacco. On weekends, he played old jazz records late into the night. I didn't mind. The sound floated through the ceiling like a heartbeat. Steady, familiar, oddly comforting. For months, life was quiet. I worked, wrote, fed my cat Nora. The city was loud outside, but the apartment felt like a cocoon. I liked the solitude. Then one Friday in October, I noticed something strange. My mail, a small stack of bills and flyers, was already sitting on my counter when I got home. I remembered locking the door that morning. I told myself I must have brought it in earlier and forgotten. City life makes you paranoid, I thought. But the next morning, the curtains in my living room were drawn, and I hadn't touched them. By Monday, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I checked the locks twice before leaving for work and again when I came home. Everything looked normal, but the air felt off. Charged. Like static before a storm. That night, while I was in the shower, I heard it. Faint footsteps in the living room. Slow, careful. The kind of sound that makes your body react before your brain can reason with it. I turned off the water, stood still, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. Wrapped in a towel, I crept into the hallway. The apartment looked empty, but when I reached the kitchen, I saw that the small bowl where I always kept my keys was empty. I tore through drawers, checked my coat pocket, under cushions, nothing. I told myself maybe I'd left them in my bag, but I knew I hadn't. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., a soft tap, tap, tap started from the ceiling. Deliberate, rhythmic. Then, clear as day, a whisper, "Don't go to sleep yet." I froze. The voice was muffled but real. I stared up, unable to move. The next morning, my hands shook as I called the landlord. He laughed it off. "The pipes make weird noises," he said. "Old buildings, remember?" I didn't mention the whisper. Saying it out loud made it sound impossible. Days blurred together. I started leaving a light on in every room. Nora the cat hissed at the corners of the ceiling, sometimes pacing under one spot near the hallway. One evening, I decided to confront Mr. Leonard. Maybe the tapping was his doing. Maybe his record player or some creaky floorboard. I knocked on his door. He answered after a long pause, smiling faintly. "Camille, right? Everything okay down there?" "I keep hearing noises," I said. "Like footsteps or someone moving around. Do you—" His expression didn't change, but his eyes did, sharp for a split second before softening again. These old floors carry every sound. I try to keep the music low." I nodded, uneasy. "Thanks, just checking." That night, I pushed the couch under the spot where Nora always stared. I climbed up and tapped the ceiling. Hollow. When I pressed harder, the plaster flexed slightly like there was a gap above it. My stomach dropped. There was space up there, a crawl space. I went to bed fully dressed, a flashlight on my nightstand. Every creak made me sit up straight. Around midnight, I heard it again in that same careful movement directly overhead. I'd had enough. The next morning, I called the police. 2 officers arrived, one young, one older, both skeptical. "Anyone else have access to your unit?" The older one asked. "Just the landlord and my upstairs neighbor." They inspected the locks, windows, then the ceiling. Near the hallway light fixture, the younger officer pointed. "There, see that line? A faint square outline, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. A hatch." They fetched a ladder from the cruiser and pushed it open. Dust fell like snow. The officer shone his flashlight into the darkness. "Jesus," he muttered. "There's a crawl space between the floors." He climbed up, disappeared for a moment, then called down. "You'll want to see this." Inside the narrow space were blankets, a flashlight, and a small camera. And on the other side, a hole cut through the wood directly above my bedroom. The officers went upstairs. I waited in the hallway, shaking. Within minutes, they came back with Mr. Leonard in handcuffs. "Found a key ring with her apartment keys," one said quietly. He didn't fight, didn't even look surprised. As they led him past me, he said softly, almost kindly, "You should have kept the lights off. It's easier to sleep that way." The police later told me he'd been sneaking down through the attic for months, entering whenever I was out, sometimes while I slept. They found photographs of me taken from that hole in the ceiling. Shots of me reading, cooking, even sleeping. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind except Nora and a suitcase of clothes. The landlord changed the locks and painted the apartment, but I never went back. For a while, I jumped at every sound. Showers felt unsafe. I kept every light on, every curtain shut. I learned what real fear feels like. Not screaming, not running, but the quiet kind that lives in your bones. I found another place eventually. Newer, brighter, with neighbors who actually spoke to one another. It took time, but I started to feel human again. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I still hear the faint echo of jazz in my head. That same rhythm from the ceiling. I tell myself it's just memory, not something real. Because if I've learned anything, it's that evil doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes wearing a cardigan, carrying old records and smiling through the floorboards. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, when the air shifts, when your gut tightens, it usually is. The world teaches us to be polite, to doubt ourselves rather than make others uncomfortable. But safety begins with belief in your own perception. If you feel watched, listen to that feeling. Fear, in the right measure, is not weakness, it's survival. When I was 8, my father told me the river behind our house could remember voices. If you spoke your secrets into the current, it would keep them forever, rolling them over the stones, whispering them to no one. I used to believe him. I'd stand at the edge, mud between my toes, and tell the water everything. That I wanted a dog, that I hated math, that I loved how my father's hands smelled like sawdust and tobacco. Years later, when he passed, I found myself thinking about that river again, how it never stopped moving, even when everything else did. I hadn't planned to go back. But my mother called one morning from the old house near Ipoh. Her voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before. "Farah," she said, "I can't handle it here alone anymore. The house is too big. We should sell it." I was 32 and living in Kuala Lumpur then, working in advertising, constantly tired and constantly pretending not to be. I told my boss I needed 2 weeks off and took the train north, carrying only a suitcase and the feeling that I was walking into a past I'd outgrown. The moment I saw the river again, I felt it. The smell of wet soil, the cicadas screaming from the trees, the slow hum of a place that hadn't changed in decades. But the town had. Half the neighbors were gone. The small shops were boarded up. There were rumors about break-ins, missing livestock, even a robbery that turned violent a few months before. When I pulled up to the house, my mother was waiting by the veranda, a little stooped but smiling. "You look tired," she said, brushing dust from my sleeve like I was still a child. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of camphor and rain. My father's armchair sat in the corner where he'd left it, its cushion worn into the shape of his shoulders. The walls were lined with old photographs. His fishing trips, my school awards, my parents' wedding portrait in sepia tones. That first night, we talked for hours. She told me about the offers she'd received, none good enough, and how the new families who'd moved nearby didn't stay long. People say the river floods too easily, she said, lowering her voice. And there's talk of thefts lately. Boats coming at night. I laughed it off, but her eyes stayed fixed on the window. It's different now, Farah. The river isn't what it used to be. At the time, I thought she meant the weather. The first night back, the humidity wrapped around the house like a wet blanket. I could barely sleep. I lay on my old bed, fan whirring overhead, listening to the night insects. Every sound seemed amplified. The croak of frogs, the rustle of palm leaves, the soft lap of water against the shore. Around midnight, thunder cracked across the hills. Rain followed, thick, violent, relentless. I closed my window before it could soak the curtains. That's when I heard it, a low, distant growl that wasn't thunder, steady, mechanical. It took me a few seconds to realize it was an engine, a boat engine. I sat up and peeked through the slats. Out on the river, a faint light wobbled, a flashlight or a phone. The silhouette of a small motorboat drifted slowly near the bank. 2 figures stood in it. I went to my mother's room. She stirred when I entered. "Mom, there's someone on the river," I whispered. She sat up, frowning. "Probably fishermen. They come sometimes when the tide's high." "In a storm?" She sighed, pulling her shawl tighter. "People need to eat, Farah. Go back to bed," I tried. But even after the thunder faded, I could still hear the soft drone of that engine. It didn't leave until almost 2 in the morning. The next morning, I mentioned it again. Mom poured tea and said quietly, "Your father used to help some men from the next village. They'd borrow his boat sometimes. Maybe it's them." But I noticed her hand shaking as she said it. 2 nights later, the storm returned, fiercer than before. The rain hammered the roof. The lights flickered twice before holding steady. I went to bed around 10, exhausted. At 1:47 a.m., a sound pulled me awake, a single creak, then another. It took me a moment to realize it came from the veranda. Then squelch, squelch, wet footsteps. I froze, every muscle tense. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen glowing faintly. I grabbed it, no signal. The storm must have cut the tower again. My heart pounded in my ears. I tiptoed to the window. Through the blur of rain, I saw them. 2 men, drenched, standing by the back door. Their clothes clung to them. One carried a flashlight, the other a crowbar. They were whispering. I couldn't hear much, but one phrase cut through. "The old woman's asleep. Take the jewelry." I backed away, stomach twisting. I ran to my mother's room, shook her shoulder. "Mom, wake up." She blinked, confused. "What is it?" "There are men outside." Her face drained of color. She didn't ask questions, just reached for my hand. "We'll hide. Under the stairs." The storage space beneath the stairs was small, built decades ago to store rice sacks during floods. We slipped inside and shut the wooden door, crouching in the dark. Then came the sounds. The door creaked open. Boots on the floorboards. Drawers opening. Metal clinking. Laughter low and mean. I could feel my mother trembling beside me. "They'll leave," I mouthed. She nodded, eyes glistening. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, silence. We waited 5 more minutes before I dared to move. I eased the panel open, my legs shaking. The living room was a wreck. Drawers ransacked, mud smeared across the tile. And then I saw him. A man sat in my father's armchair, dry, calm, smoking. He looked up at me through the smoke. His voice was almost gentle. "You shouldn't have come back here." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mother stepped beside me, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" "Get out of my house!" The man didn't move. He took another drag from his cigarette, eyes steady. "Your husband and I had a deal once," he said. "He promised things he couldn't give." I swallowed hard. "What deal?" He smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter now. But this place, it should have stayed quiet." "Please," my mother whispered. "Just go." He stood then, slow and deliberate. His wet boots left perfect prints on the old rug. "Your father was a good man," he said. He just didn't understand that good intentions can ruin people. He dropped the cigarette in the ashtray, my father's ashtray, and walked toward the door. For a moment, lightning flashed, illuminating his face. It was lined, tired, older than I expected. When the thunder rolled again, he was gone. I rushed to lock the door, my hands shaking. Mom, what was he talking about? She sank into a chair, staring at the river through the rain-streaked glass. Your father helped people after the flood, she said finally. Families who lost everything. One man, he wanted more than help. He wanted a partnership. Your father refused. There was a fight. I thought it was over. Who was he? She hesitated. His name was Rahim. He left after that night. I never saw him again. The power flickered, then went out. We sat there in the dark, the sound of rain swallowing everything. By morning, the police were there, 2 officers, polite but detached. They looked around, took photos, wrote notes. No sign of forced entry, one said. Could be the storm pushed the door loose. I told them about the man who spoke to us. They exchanged a glance. Any idea who he might be? I hesitated. Maybe someone my father knew. His name might have been Rahim. One of them nodded slowly. Rahim bin Hassan? He drowned in this river 8 years ago. Boat capsized during a flood. My mother's breath caught. That can't be, the officer shrugged. People talk, but we found his ID back then. When they left, I stood by the riverbank. The current was brown and fast, swollen from the rain. Near the waterline, a single cigarette butt rested on the mud, damp but unburnt. I bent down, staring at it. My father's brand. Behind me, Mom said softly, "Some debts never wash away." That evening, we packed our things. The house would be sold no matter the price. As we drove away, I looked back at the river one last time. The water shimmered in the fading light, calm now as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Some places remember, some houses too. Coming home can mean more than returning to a place. It means facing what time has buried. The past, if ignored, has a way of waiting for us in silence. Never assume safety and familiarity. And never forget that the choices of one generation ripple through the next, like a river that never stops carrying what it's been given. The road to the cabin always felt longer in winter. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned over the highway like they wanted to keep you there. Or maybe it was just that silence that snow brings, that thick quiet you can't quite get used to. I hadn't been up there in nearly a year. After my wife Dana passed, I started renting the place out to tourists through a management company. It was easier that way. I didn't have to think about her coffee mug still sitting on the shelf, or the smell of her cinnamon candles still faint in the walls. But this year things had gotten strange. 3 days ago I got an email from the caretaker, or rather, an automated message that my last payment to him had bounced. I tried calling, no answer. I tried again the next day, still nothing. Then a neighbor from the nearest town, a man named Hal, called to say he'd seen smoke coming from the chimney. "That's odd," I said. Hal paused. "Yeah, considering the caretaker's been gone since November." So here I was, driving through a mountain pass with chains on my tires and a thermos of bad gas station coffee, wondering if I was about to find squatters, vandals, or something worse. The cabin sat near the tree line, tucked between pines, the kind of postcard place you'd expect to see on a Christmas card, or in a murder mystery. I built most of it with my father back in my 20s, long before Dana. After she died, I couldn't bear to sell it. When I finally pulled into the long, snow-covered driveway, I saw it immediately, and smoke curling from the chimney. For a second, I felt relief. Maybe the caretaker finally decided to show up. But then I noticed the footprints leading from the porch, small, narrow, and recent. Someone was inside. The front door was unlocked. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open, and warm air rushed past me. That shouldn't have been possible. The power company was supposed to have shut off the electricity for the season. The fireplace was lit, wood crackled, and there she was. A woman sat on the couch facing the fire, her back straight, her hair tied in a messy knot. She was wearing one of Dana's coats, the red one with the shearling collar that I'd packed away after the funeral. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You're early," she said softly, almost like she'd been expecting me. I froze in the doorway. "Who are you?" She tilted her head, studying me. Her voice was calm, almost affectionate. "You said you'd come back for me." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Excuse me?" She smiled faintly and looked down at the table. Scattered across it were photographs. Me and Dana at the lake at our wedding on the porch of this very cabin. I hadn't seen those pictures in years. I thought I'd boxed them away. "How did you get in here?" I asked, stepping closer. "Where's the caretaker?" She didn't answer. Instead, she ran her fingers along the edge of one of the photos. "You shouldn't have left the door unlocked all those winters," she said, her tone suddenly sharper. "Things get in when you're not looking." Something in the way she said it made my skin crawl. I took another step forward, ready to demand answers. But when she looked up at me, the firelight caught her eyes, and for a fraction of a second I thought I saw something I recognized.